Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. A perfect Thursday. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The bell above the door of De Oude Lantern chimed its familiar cheerful tune. 7:02 a.m. Right on time. I unhooked my helmet, the cool Utrecht air still clinging to my cheeks from the cycle ride along the Oudegracht. The canal, even at this hour, was a mirror of cobbled streets and the tall, narrow houses leaning companionably against each other, their gabled facades still softened by the pre-dawn light. Another Thursday. My favorite kind of Thursday, actually, the one just before the weekend rush, promising a steady rhythm of regulars and the comforting aroma of coffee beans and freshly baked appeltart. God morgen, Leonie. Bram poked his head out from the small kitchen, flour dusting his dark curls. His grin was infectious, as always. Coffee machines warming up. Did you bring the sunshine with you? Tried my best, Bram, I laughed, stowing my bag beneath the counter. Looks like it might actually stick around today. I glanced out at the sky, a pale, promising blue peeking through the wisps of cloud. The routine was a well-worn groove, comfortable and predictable. I tied on my apron, the scent of old linen and faint coffee clinging to it. First, the chalkboard. Yesterday, I'd meticulously written out that a special brew, a single-origin Ethiopian yirgacheffe, notes of jasmine and citrus. I'd even drawn a little steaming cup next to it. I picked up the chalk, ready to add the tart van de dag, Bram's famous lemon drizzle. But my hand paused. The board was, as it had been on Wednesday morning. Special brew, Colombian Supremo, rich and nutty. My yirgacheffe, my little drawing, gone. Wiped clean, replaced by the older special. Bram, I called, a faint irritation pricking me. Did you change the chalkboard back last night? He emerged, wiping his hands on his apron. Change it back. To what? I haven't touched it since you did your fancy lettering yesterday. Looked good, by the way. He squinted at the board. Ha. Supremo. Thought we were on to the Ethiopian. We are, I said, a little defensively. I wrote it up. Clearly. Bram shrugged, that easygoing way he had that usually calmed me, but today just felt dismissive. Maybe the evening cleaner wiped it by mistake and then tried to remember what was there before. Or you were half asleep and wrote the old one down without thinking. I wasn't half asleep, I muttered, but I took the wet cloth and wiped the Supremo away, carefully rewriting Ethiopian yirgacheffe. My little drawing felt less enthusiastic this time. Stress, probably. I'd been feeling a bit stretched with rent lately. My mind was likely playing tricks. The first regular was Meneer Bakker, at precisely 7:30 a.m. A retired history teacher, always with a neatly folded newspaper under his arm and a request for zwart coffee, alsjeblieft. Strong. God morgen, Meneer Bakker, I chirped, already reaching for his favorite mug. Guten Morgen, Fräulein, he replied, his voice carrying a distinct, if slight, German lilt. He unfolded his paper. The usual, please. I paused, mid-pour. German. Meneer Bakker was as Dutch as stroopwafels. He'd lived in Utrecht his whole life, often regaling me with stories of the Dom Tower's history. I glanced at him. He looked the same, tweed jacket, spectacles perched on his nose. Maybe he was trying out a new persona. A little joke. Strong black coffee, coming right up, I said, keeping my tone light. He just nodded, already engrossed in his paper. I shook my head. People were strange. Next came Mevrouw de Vries, a flurry of colorful scarves and silver bracelets, always at 8:15 a.m. Leonie, my love, she trilled, her voice like wind chimes. The usual, and make it snappy, I have my bridge club this morning. Of course, Mevrouw de Vries, I said, turning to the espresso machine for her standard cappuccino. Oh, no, dear, she said, tapping her chin thoughtfully. Not a cappuccino morning. I fancy an Earl Grey today. Lots of milk, just a whisper of sugar. I blinked. Her usual had been a cappuccino, extra foam, for the 3 years I'd worked here. An Earl Grey? She beamed. Yes, that's my usual, isn't it? Perfect for a Thursday. She winked, as if sharing a delightful secret. I made her tea, a small knot of confusion tightening in my stomach. I was definitely tired. Maybe I needed more sleep, less scrolling on my phone before bed. I glanced at my phone, Thursday, 8:17. Date and time seemed perfectly normal. The morning progressed. Each familiar face, each familiar order, or almost familiar. A student, Anya, who always ordered a latte with oat milk, today asked for a flat white with regular milk, then looked confused when I double-checked, saying, "But I always have a flat white." The slight deviations were like pebbles in my shoe, small enough to ignore for a while, but persistently, nigglingly there. Lunch rush came and went. Bram hummed as he restocked the pastries, seemingly oblivious. I tried to brush off the morning's oddities. It was me. I was misremembering, getting people confused. It happened. Around 3 p.m., during a lull, Bram leaned against the counter, stretching. "Thank goodness it's almost Friday," he said with a sigh of relief. "Big plans for the weekend?" I looked up from wiping down the espresso machine. "Friday? Bram, it's Thursday." He frowned. "Is it? Oh. Right. Thursday. Feels like a Friday." He laughed it off, shaking his head. "Wishful thinking, I guess." And then he launched into a story about a disastrous attempt to make a soufflé the previous night, which was Wednesday, and the conversation moved on. But for a second, his casual mention of Friday had sent a weird shiver down my spine. He hadn't acknowledged it again, just moved on. By the time we closed up at 6 p.m., I was mentally exhausted. I chalked it up to a long day and an overactive imagination. As I locked the door, I glanced at the chalkboard. Ethiopian Yirgacheffe, it declared proudly, my little steaming cup still there. Good. At least that was right. The cycle home was normal. The canals gleamed in the setting sun, students laughed as they cycled past in groups, the dawn tower chimed the hour. I made a simple dinner, watched some mindless television, and fell into bed, determined to get a good night's sleep and reset my overtired brain. I dreamt of Friday. A bright, sunny Friday, the cafe bustling, everything perfectly, blessedly normal. I was laughing with Bram, serving cappuccinos to Mevrouw de Vries, and Meneer Bakker was speaking perfect, unaccented Dutch. The chime of the alarm dragged me from the depths of that happy Friday dream. 6:30 a.m. I blinked, the lingering contentment of the dream slowly fading. Thursday. Again. My phone screen confirmed it, Thursday, October 12th. The same date as yesterday. A cold dread, entirely different from yesterday's vague unease, began to creep into me. No. That wasn't possible. I must have misread it yesterday. Or my phone was glitching. I got out of bed, heart thumping a little too fast, and went to my small kitchen calendar, the one with pictures of Dutch windmills. I'd circled the 12th yesterday. There was the circle. Thursday. Okay. Okay, deep breaths. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe I'd looked at my phone yesterday, seen Thursday, and then my brain had just skipped. It was a weird coincidence. My cycle to de Oude Lantaarn felt different. The familiar street seemed sharper, the colors a little too bright. The air felt heavy. The bell above the door chimed. 7:02 a.m. Good morgen, Leonie. Bram, from the kitchen, flour-dusted curls. Coffee machines warming up. Did you bring the sunshine with you? The exact same words. The exact same intonation. I stared at him. You said that yesterday. He looked puzzled. Said what? About the sunshine. Well, it's a bit of a gray start, isn't it? He gestured vaguely towards the window, where indeed, a thin drizzle was beginning to fall, unlike yesterday's clear promise. My gaze snapped to the chalkboard. Special brew, Colombian Supremo, rich and nutty. My blood ran cold. The Yirgachev, the drawing, completely gone. As if I'd never touched it. Bram, my voice was tight. The chalkboard. It's reverted again. Reverted? He came out, wiping his hands. He glanced at it. Oh, right, the Supremo. Still feels like we should be on the Ethiopian, but hey, boss's orders, I guess. He winked, then frowned. You look pale, Leo. You okay? I wrote Ethiopian Yirgachev on there yesterday. Twice, I managed, my voice trembling slightly. Bram's brow furrowed with genuine concern. Twice. When? After the cleaner messed it up. There was no cleaner messing it up, I insisted, feeling a rising tide of panic. It just changes. He put a hand on my shoulder. Hey, easy. Maybe you're just a bit stressed. We've all been there. Grab yourself a coffee. You'll feel better. His kindness felt suffocating. He didn't understand. How could he? 7:30 a.m. The bell chimed. Meneer Bakker. Newspaper under his arm. Good morgen, Meneer Bakker, I said, my voice a little shaky. More, menskind, he replied, his Afrikaans accent unmistakable. He'd spent a year in South Africa as a young man, he'd told me once, but I'd never heard him use the accent. The usual, please. Afrikaans. Yesterday it was German. The day before, Standard Dutch. My hand hovered over the coffee pot. Black coffee? Of course. Strong. As always. He didn't notice my hesitation, already settling into his usual chair. I felt like I was moving through a dream, a particularly unsettling one where all the actors knew their lines except me. Mevrouw de Vries arrived at 8:15 a.m. Leonie, my angel, she sang out. The usual, if you please. And don't forget that extra dash of cinnamon, it's what makes it, my usual, after all. Her usual was a cappuccino. Extra foam. Never with cinnamon. Yesterday, it had been Earl Grey. The day before, a cappuccino. A cappuccino, with cinnamon? I asked, weakly. But of course, dear. She patted my hand over the counter. You always remember. The day unfolded, a grotesque parody of the one before. Each interaction was a near repeat, but with these small, jarring shifts. Anya the student ordered an almond milk chai latte, confiding that she'd always been more of a tea person. Bram mentioned, around 3 p.m., thank God it's almost Friday, then, when I stared at him blankly, said, oh, right. Thursday. Long week. I was meticulous. I wrote down everything on a notepad hidden under the counter. Times, orders, phrases, the accents. The evidence was mounting, undeniable to me, yet invisible to everyone else. The feeling of isolation was a physical weight, pressing down on me. When I locked up, the chalkboard, which I had once again defiantly changed to Ethiopian Yirgachev, now read, in Bram's neat block letters, tomorrow, Friday. Try our famous appeltart. Except it wouldn't be Friday. And it wasn't Bram's handwriting. It was too perfect, too generic. My stomach lurched. This was new. This was, an escalation. I cycled home in a daze. The city lights reflecting on the wet canals seemed to shimmer with an unnatural intensity. My small apartment felt like a prison. I checked my phone. Thursday, October 12th. I checked the news websites, social media. Nothing. No mention of repeating days, no widespread panic. Just normal Thursday evening news. Was I losing my mind? Was this some elaborate, cruel prank? But who would, or even could, orchestrate something so pervasive, so subtle? The effort involved would be monumental. That night, I didn't dream of Friday. I dreamt of a dark, silent cafe, the chalkboard glowing faintly in the gloom. On it, a single word, repeated over and over, THURSDAY 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 THURSDAY. Each iteration was slightly different, the chalk strokes more frantic, more desperate. I woke up sweating, my heart pounding, long before my alarm. The display read, Thursday, October 12th, approximate, 1980 words. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The third Thursday began not with a chime or a greeting, but with the silent, screaming confirmation of the date on my phone. The dread was a familiar companion now, cold and heavy in my gut. I didn't even bother looking at the kitchen calendar. I knew what it would say. Cycling to work, the familiar route felt alien. The slant of light through the leaves, the particular shade of red on a postbox, the pattern of cracks in the pavement, I found myself scrutinizing everything, searching for other inconsistencies, other signs that the world was as fractured as my perception of time. Were the canals flowing a little faster? Did the bells of the Dom Tower sound a fraction of a tone lower? I couldn't be sure. The more I looked for wrongness, the more the ordinary seemed to shimmer with potential menace. At de Oude Lantern, the bell chimed. 7:02 a.m. Morning, Leonie. Bram called out, his voice echoing with that same false cheer. Coffee's on. Heard the weather's meant to pick up later. A different greeting. A small mercy, perhaps. Or just another variable in this endless, maddening equation. I didn't reply, just walked straight to the chalkboard. Special brew, Colombian Supremo, rich and nutty. Of course. I didn't even feel surprised anymore, just a dull ache of resignation. I picked up the cloth. Still convinced the chalkboard ghost is at it? Bram asked, coming to stand beside me. There was a hint of concern in his voice, but also a touch of weary amusement. It's not a ghost, Bram, I said, my voice flat. It just resets. To the Supremo. Our most popular being, to be fair, he mused. Maybe it's a sign we should just stick with it. I didn't bother changing it this time. What was the point? Meneer Bakker arrived. 7:30 a.m. Newspaper. Good morgen, Leonie, he said, his voice perfectly normal, standard Dutch. No German, no Afrikaans. A reset for him too, it seemed. Black coffee, strong, if you please. Coming up, I replied, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. I was an automaton, going through the motions. Mevrouw de Vries, 8:15 a.m. Darling Leonie. You look a little tired today, sweet. She peered at me with genuine sympathy. Make mine a strong Americano, black. Need a bit of a kick this morning. An Americano. Another deviation. Her usual was a chameleon, ever-changing. I nodded, my internal notepad already making the entry. I started to experiment, in small ways. When a tourist asked for directions to the Anne Frank house, I deliberately sent them towards the Central Museum instead. They thanked me politely and headed off. I felt a small, guilty thrill. Would it change anything? Would they appear tomorrow, confused and complaining? Or would the script simply absorb my minor act of rebellion? My phone remained my only anchor to what I believed was true time. It steadfastly proclaimed it Thursday, October 12th. I discreetly tried to check other people's devices. Bram's phone, lying on the counter, also said Thursday, 12th. But when I casually asked a customer setting her laptop up at a table what the date was, she glanced at her screen and said, Friday the 13th, ooh, spooky, before laughing and ordering a croissant. She didn't seem to notice my stunned silence. Friday the 13th. Was her device wrong? Or mine? Or was the date itself now subjective, a personal reality for each individual? The thought made me feel dizzy. I began to meticulously document everything in a small notebook I kept hidden in my locker. Not just the orders, but snippets of conversation, the exact phrasing Bram used, the color of a passing cyclist's jacket I saw through the window at 10:04 a.m. I was building a case, though for whom, I didn't know. Myself, perhaps. Proof that I wasn't mad. My attempts to discuss it, even obliquely, were met with blank stares or gentle deflections. Doesn't it feel like we just had this conversation yesterday? I'd venture to Bram, after he recounted the same anecdote about his cat knocking over a plant. What conversation, he'd say, genuinely puzzled. Oh, about Mittens? Yeah, she's always a little terror. But no, I don't think I mentioned it yesterday. Yesterday was, what did we do yesterday? He'd frown, then shrug. Dunno. Wednesday things, I guess. Wednesday. He always remembered a Wednesday. But, which Wednesday? The isolation was the worst part. I was surrounded by people, familiar faces, yet I was utterly alone in my reality. They were all moving in sync to a rhythm I could no longer hear, or rather, a rhythm that kept stuttering and repeating only for me. I felt like a ghost in my own life, observing a play where everyone else was blissfully unaware the scenery kept changing. One afternoon, during the usual 3 p.m. lull, the bell above the door chimed. This was not a regular occurrence. Most of our afternoon customers were already settled. A man stepped in. He wasn't a regular. I would have remembered him. He was tall, dressed in unassuming dark clothes, and his eyes, they were a very pale, watchful gray. He didn't look around the cafe, didn't scan the pastry display or the menu board. His gaze came straight to me. He approached the counter. Just a glass of water, please, he said. His voice was quiet, neutral. English, with an accent I couldn't quite place. I poured him the water, my hand surprisingly steady. There was something about his stillness, his focused attention, that was different from the slightly blurred, repetitive behavior of everyone else. He took the glass. You notice things, don't you? He said, not a question, but a statement. My heart leaped. Notice what? I whispered, trying to keep my voice even. He took a slow sip of water. The echoes. The little skips in the record. His pale eyes held mine. Some Thursdays are just, sticky. Prone to getting caught in the works. What works? I breathed, hope and fear warring within me. Was this it? Someone who understood. Best not to pull too hard on a stuck thread, he said, his voice dropping even lower. It can unravel more than you intend. He placed the empty glass precisely in the center of a coaster. Don't ask too many questions. Don't try to fix it. Just, ride it out. But what is it? I pleaded, desperate. Why is this happening? He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Questions are how you start pulling. And this one. He paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. This one doesn't like to be pulled. Then, he turned and walked out. The bell chimed. He was gone. I stood frozen, his words echoing in my mind. Sticky Thursdays. Don't pull too hard, a warning. But a warning from whom? An ally? Or something else? Bram came out from the kitchen. Who was that? Just, a customer, I said, my voice faint. Wanted a glass of water. Bram shrugged. Odd. Didn't even look at the cakes. He went back to his tasks, humming. The stranger's visit, his cryptic words, had been absorbed into the fabric of the day, unnoticed by anyone but me. That night, my dreams of Friday returned, more vivid, more painful than ever. I'd wake up with the phantom taste of Friday's coffee, the echo of Friday's laughter, only to be confronted by the relentless, unchanging date on my phone. Thursday. The stranger did not reappear on the subsequent Thursdays. I scanned every face, listened for his quiet voice, but he was gone. Had he even been real? His warning, however, stayed with me, a constant, unsettling hum beneath the surface of the looping days. I started to notice more subtle environmental shifts. The flickering fluorescent light above the pastry case, it wasn't just flickering randomly anymore. It seemed to pulse in a slow, deliberate rhythm, short long. Then it would stop, and later, pulse again, long. Was it a code? Or was I projecting patterns onto chaos? One afternoon, I was certain I saw the sugar shakers on an empty table subtly rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. I'd glance away, then back, and the salt shaker would be where the pepper should be. When I reached out to correct it, my hand would tremble. My journal entries grew longer, more frantic. I started drawing maps of the cafe, noting the positions of objects, trying to catch the environment in its subtle acts of rebellion. My research online yielded nothing but crackpot theories about time slips and government conspiracies, none of which resonated with the quiet, insidious nature of what I was experiencing. The repetition was grinding me down. My focus frayed. I made mistakes with orders, gave wrong change, my carefully constructed barista persona cracking under the strain. Bram started looking at me with real worry. "Leonie, are you sure you're all right?" he asked one afternoon, his brow crinkled. "You seem miles away. Maybe you should take a few days off." Sick leave. Take a few days off from Thursday? The absurdity of it was almost laughable. "I'm fine, Bram," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just a bit tired." His concern, however genuine, only amplified my isolation. He was living in a world that moved forward, while I was trapped in a stuttering present. He couldn't understand. No one could. The stranger's warning echoed, "Don't pull too hard," but how could I not? How could I simply accept this quiet madness? Approximate, 3,050 words, total 50-30. The following Thursday, or perhaps, the same Thursday, yet again, began with a new kind of anomaly. I woke up, braced for the date, and my phone showed. Friday, October 13th. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me. It was over. It had just been a bizarre, extended glitch, a week of Thursdays. I laughed, a shaky, breathless sound. Friday. I practically skipped on my cycle to work. The air felt lighter, the city vibrant and new. "God morgen, Leonie." Bram greeted me, beaming. "TGIF, right?" "Right." I grinned, feeling tears prick my eyes. "Oh, Bram, you have no idea." "Rough week?" he asked sympathetically. "Something like that." I went to the chalkboard. It read, "Friday special, weekend warm-up. All muffins half price." In my handwriting. From when? A Friday that had happened, a Friday I now remembered clearly. The relief was so profound, it was almost painful. Meneer Bakker came in. "God morgen, Leonie. Lovely Friday, isn't it? Standard Dutch. Black coffee. Mevrouw de Vries. Leonie, my star. Cappuccino today, it's Friday after all, time to celebrate." Everything was normal. Perfectly, beautifully normal. The orders were right, the conversations flowed, the day moved forward. I felt like I'd been holding my breath for weeks, and could finally exhale. The day was busy, cheerful. I worked with an energy I hadn't felt in ages. As we were closing up, Bram said, "So, that weird customer from yesterday, the one who just wanted water? Did he ever say what he was on about? I froze, the cloth in my hand dropping to the counter. What customer? You know, Bram said, frowning slightly. Yesterday. Thursday. The quiet guy. You looked pretty spooked after he left. Said he gave you some cryptic warning or something. My blood turned to ice. Yesterday. Thursday. The stranger. Bram remembered the stranger. But the stranger had appeared on one of the repeating Thursdays, a Thursday Bram shouldn't have a distinct, linear memory of. Not if this was a true Friday. I don't recall, I stammered, my mind racing. Bram shrugged. Must have been more memorable for me then. Anyway, have a good weekend, Leo. You too, Bram, I whispered. I cycled home, the earlier euphoria replaced by a creeping, horrifying suspicion. My phone still said Friday. The news was about Friday. But Bram's comment, it was a crack in the facade. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Bram's words. If he remembered the stranger from yesterday Thursday, did that mean this Friday wasn't a true escape? Was it just another variation? A more elaborate one? The next morning, my alarm went off. I snatched up my phone. Saturday, October 14th. Relief, again, but weaker this time, tainted with doubt. I went through the motions of a Saturday. The city was bustling. I went to the market, bought groceries. Everything seemed normal. But the doubt lingered. A seed of paranoia. Sunday, October 15th. Still progressing. Monday, October 16th. I went to work. Bram was his usual Monday self, grumbling good-naturedly about the weekend being too short. No mention of sticky Thursdays or cryptic strangers. The chalkboard was as it should be for a Monday. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Bram's comment was just a fluke, a weird convergence of memory. Maybe I was finally free. Then, on Tuesday morning, October 17th, as I was serving Mynheer Bakker his coffee, he looked up from his paper and said, "You know, it's funny, Leonie." For a moment there, I had the strangest sense of déjà vu. As if we've had this exact conversation before. On a Thursday, perhaps. He chuckled. Silly, isn't it? Getting old. My smile froze. Very silly, Mynheer Bakker. The knot of dread, which had loosened its grip, tightened with brutal force. It wasn't over. It had just become more insidious. The loop was wider now, more convincing. But the echoes were still there, bleeding through. The quiet contagion was adapting. Approximate, 1,000 words added to Phase 2, bringing it to minus 4,050. Total now minus 6,030. Need to steer Phase 2 towards more active investigation by Leonie. The Friday interlude was a good way to show temporary false hope and deepen paranoia. Let me adjust. The Friday interlude might be better placed as a false dawn within Phase 2, rather than the end of it, to fuel her isolation and research more. It shows the anomaly is evolving or toying with her. The stranger's warning becomes even more potent after such an event. Revised end of Phase 2/start of Phase 3 thinking. After the false Friday, and the realization that the loop is either still there or has reset/mutated, Leonie's isolation intensifies. She can't trust her own senses of relief. She must investigate more actively. The stranger's warning about not pulling too hard becomes a central conflict for her. Does she heed it and try to endure, or does she risk unraveling something by digging deeper? This is where her research needs to become more focused, perhaps even desperate. She needs to test the boundaries of the loop more deliberately. Back to the main flow, after the stranger's visit and initial environmental weirdness, flickering lights, moving objects. My journal became my only confidant, its pages filled with increasingly frantic scrawl. I started diagramming the cafe, noting the position of every salt shaker, every sugar bowl, every tilted picture frame. I took photos with my phone, time-stamped evidence of the chalkboard's defiant reversions. But what good was evidence when the context kept shifting, when no one else perceived the baseline? The dreams of Friday became a torment. In them, I'd often be trying to explain the Thursdays to a sympathetic Bram or a concerned Mevrouw de Vries, but my words would come out garbled, or they'd nod and smile, then offer me a slice of a peltart as if I'd merely commented on the weather. I'd wake up with a scream caught in my throat, the date on my phone a fresh slap in the face, Thursday, October 12th. I started testing the loop more directly, albeit with a tremor of fear, the stranger's warning echoing in my mind. One Thursday, I accidentally spilled a full jug of milk on the floor right as Meneer Bakker walked in. The reaction was muted. Bram sighed, grabbed a mop, clumsy today, Leo. Meneer Bakker sidestepped the puddle with a mild, oops, voorzichtig. There was no shock, no real annoyance. The next Thursday, I didn't spill the milk. The day unfolded as if the incident had never occurred. There was no echo of it, no memory in Bram or Meneer Bakker. My actions, it seemed, left no permanent ripples. They were absorbed, smoothed over by the relentless tide of the repeating day. The sensory shifts became more pronounced for me. The coffee, some Thursdays, tasted faintly of metal, no matter which beans we used. The cheerful chime of the doorbell sometimes sounded discordant, grating. The familiar scent of cinnamon from Bram's baking would occasionally carry an undercurrent of something else, something vaguely chemical and unsettling. Was the loop degrading? Or was it my perception that was fracturing under the strain? I tried to leave notes for myself. One evening, before locking up, I scribbled, "It is still Thursday. Don't trust Friday," on a paper napkin and tucked it deep into my apron pocket. The next morning, the apron was clean, the pocket empty. The loop cleaned up after itself. It was intelligent. Or at least, self-preserving. My research online became more obsessive. I delved into obscure physics forums discussing temporal mechanics, into philosophical treatises on the nature of perception, into forgotten folklore about places where time ran thin. I found stories of lost days or localized temporal anomalies, usually dismissed as hoaxes or misinterpretations. Nothing quite matched the insidious, personal nature of my repeating Thursday. Nothing offered a solution, or even a name for what I was experiencing beyond the stranger's sticky Thursday. One afternoon, looking for a distraction, I wandered into Utrecht's public library after a particularly trying Thursday at the cafe. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. A book on local history, perhaps, or something on abnormal psychology. In the quiet, dusty aisles of the local history section, I found a small, leather-bound volume, Utrecht's Eigenaardigheden en Vergeten Zaken, Utrecht Oddities and Forgotten Matters. It was privately printed, decades old. Most of it was quaint folklore, tales of canal spirits and misbehaving gnomes. But one chapter, short and tucked away at the back, was titled De Echo Dagen, the Echo Days. My breath caught. It described, in vague and archaic Dutch, a phenomenon where certain days, in certain, thin, locations within the city, were known to stutter or reflect, causing minor repetitions or strange feelings of déjà vu for those sensitive enough to perceive them. The writer, a long-dead local antiquarian, treated it more as a curious superstition than a verifiable event. He mentioned that attempts to consciously interfere with these echoes were often met with confusion and a swift return to the dominant pattern. He also noted, ominously, that prolonged exposure could lead to a loosening of one's temporal anchor. A loosening of one's temporal anchor. That resonated with a terrifying clarity. The chapter mentioned a few historical locations associated with these echo days, most long gone or redeveloped. But one was a small, unassuming alleyway just off the Uitgracht, not far from the cafe, the Witwaterssteeg Dash. It was described as a place where time might sometimes snag on a crooked nail. Was this it? A clue? Or just another dead end, another piece of folklore to feed my growing paranoia? The stranger had warned me not to pull. This felt like pulling. But the alternative, passive endurance, was becoming unbearable. Approximate, 950 words here, Phase 2 total approximate 5,000 words. Overall total approximate 7,000 words. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The discovery of the Echo Dagon became my new fixation. It was tenuous, folkloric, but it was something dash. It gave a name, however archaic, to the madness. The Widwatersteeg dash. A place where time might snag. The phrase haunted me. The next Thursday, number. I'd lost count, they were bleeding into one amorphous, unending day. I made a plan. During my lunch break, I would go to the Widwatersteeg. I didn't know what I expected to find. A shimmering portal? A coven of temporal warlocks? More likely, just a dirty alley. But I had to see. The morning was a blur of heightened anxiety. Every repeated phrase, every subtly altered order from a regular, felt like a tightening coil. Mynheer Bakker this time spoke with a soft Frisian accent, asking for his coffee with a klontje suiker, a sugar lump, which he'd never done before. Mevrouw de Vries wanted a chocomel met slagroom, hot chocolate with whipped cream, like a child, her usual sophistication entirely absent. Bram was particularly cheerful, humming a song I was sure I'd heard him hum on at least 3 previous Thursdays. Each note grated. At 12:30 p.m., I told Bram I needed some air. He barely looked up from kneading dough. Sure, Leo. Don't be long. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked out of de Oude Lantaarn. The air outside felt thick, resistant. The short walk to the Widwatersteeg, normally a pleasant 5-minute stroll along the canal, felt like wading through treacle. The sounds of the city, bicycle bells, distant chatter, the lapping of water against the wharf cellars, seemed slightly muffled. As if coming from a great distance. The Widwatersteeg was exactly as unassuming as I'd feared, a narrow, cobbled passage between 2 tall, leaning brick buildings. Graffiti covered the lower walls. A few overflowing bins stood sentinel at one end. It smelled faintly of damp stone and stale beer. There was nothing remarkable about it. Disappointment warred with a strange sort of relief. Of course, it was just an alley. What had I expected? I stepped into the narrow space. The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. The sounds of the main street faded unnervingly fast, replaced by a profound, almost pressurized silence. It wasn't just quiet, it felt empty. Like a vacuum. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing too loudly on the cobblestones. The brick walls on either side seemed to press in. I reached the halfway point. Nothing. Just a grimy, forgotten Utrecht alley. Perhaps the old book was just that, old stories. Then, I noticed it. On the ground, near a weathered section of wall, lay a single, wilted tulip. Red. Its petals were dry, curled at the edges. It looked like it had been there for days. I wouldn't have given it a second glance, except. I remembered seeing a street vendor selling bright red tulips near the cafe that morning. Fresh ones. This one was identical in color and type, but aged, decaying. As I stared at it, a faint shimmer disturbed the air beside the tulip, just for a fraction of a second. Like heat haze rising from asphalt on a summer day, but there was no sun here, only deep shadow. I blinked. Was I imagining it? I took a step closer. The air grew colder. The silence deepened, pressing against my eardrums. And then I heard it, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. It wasn't in Dutch or English. It sounded like reversed speech. Sibilant, nonsensical. It seemed to emanate from the bricks of the wall itself. My skin prickled. This was no ordinary alley. The old book wasn't just folklore. The stranger's warning screamed in my head, "Don't pull too hard." Stepping into this alley felt like yanking on the thread with all my might. Suddenly, the whispering intensified, swirling around me, and with it came a wave of intense nausea and disorientation. The cobblestones beneath my feet seemed to tilt. I squeezed my eyes shut, clutching my head. Images flashed behind my eyelids, the cafe, but distorted, the colors lurid, the faces of Bram and the regulars stretched into grotesque masks. I saw the chalkboard, words scrolling across it too fast to read, then resolving into a single, stark message, GAWEG. Go away. I stumbled backwards, gasping, my hand reaching out to steady myself against the opposite wall. The moment my fingers brushed the cold, damp brick, the whispering stopped. The nausea receded. The alley was just an alley again, silent, grimy, unremarkable. The wilted tulip lay on the ground, innocently dead. But I knew. I knew this place was wrong. It was connected. This was a node, a focal point for the temporal disturbance. Or perhaps, its source. I fled the Widwatersteeg, bursting back out onto the bustling Outgracht, gulping in the normal, noisy air. My legs were shaking. People glanced at me, a pale, wild-eyed woman emerging from a dark alley, then quickly looked away. Back at the Oud Lantern, Bram was shaping rolls. Feeling better? He asked, without looking up. Much, I lied, my voice thin. The rest of the day passed in a haze of terror and dawning, horrifying understanding. The anomaly wasn't just a passive loop, it was reactive. It had a presence, a rudimentary awareness, and it didn't like being investigated. The message on the hallucinatory chalkboard was clear. The stakes had escalated. This wasn't just about my sanity anymore. The phenomenon was more than a glitch, it felt ancient, almost territorial. What if, pulling too hard didn't just unravel the day, but unraveled me? That night, my dreams were no longer of Friday. They were of the Widwatersteeg. I was trapped in its narrow confines, the whispering voices clawing at my mind, the walls closing in. I saw the stranger from the cafe standing at the alley's entrance, his pale eyes filled with an expression I couldn't decipher, pity? Warning? Or was he a guardian of this place? The next Thursday, the atmosphere in the cafe was subtly different. The offness of the regulars' behavior was more pronounced. Meneer Bakker didn't just have an accent, he spoke in rapid, fluent Italian for several minutes before switching abruptly to Dutch, seemingly unaware of the change. Mevrouw de Vries ordered, the usual, then stared blankly at me when I asked what that was, before bursting into tears for no discernible reason, then just as quickly brightening and asking for a slice of a peltart. Even Bram was affected. He kept misplacing things, his keys, the cinnamon shaker, a whole tray of croissants that simply vanished from the cooling rack, only to reappear an hour later on a shelf where they couldn't possibly have been. He'd frown, scratch his head, and mutter about not getting enough sleep, his usual cheerfulness strained. The environmental warping intensified too. The lights in the cafe flickered constantly now, sometimes spelling out that same short long pattern I'd noticed before. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed deeper, sometimes appearing to stretch or writhe in my peripheral vision. One afternoon, I was certain I saw my reflection in the polished chrome of the espresso machine blink out of sync with me. I felt a desperate need to talk to someone, anyone who might understand. But who? The stranger was gone. Bram was becoming part of the distortion. My journal entries grew more desperate. Was I the only one holding on to the edges of reality, while everyone else was slipping into this quiet, creeping madness? I considered going back to the Widwatersteeg, despite the terror it invoked. It was the only place where the anomaly had shown a direct, almost personal reaction. But the warning, GAWEG, was seared into my memory. What would happen if I defied it again? Then, another regular, a quiet university student named Elodie who usually sat in the corner with her laptop, did something unexpected. She always ordered a simple black coffee and never interacted much. But this Thursday, as I placed her coffee down, she looked up, her eyes, usually downcast, sharp and focused. It's the frequency, isn't it? She whispered, her voice barely audible. It's getting louder. My blood froze. I stared at her. What do you mean? Elodie glanced around, then leaned in conspiratorially. The hum. The city's hum. It's always there, but lately, it's changed. It's trying to tune us to its key. She tapped her temple. Some of us are more receptive. Before I could respond, ask her what she meant, who us was, her focus seemed to blur. She blinked, then gave me a polite, distant smile. Thanks for the coffee, she said, in her usual timid voice, and turned back to her laptop, seemingly oblivious to the extraordinary thing she'd just said. An ally? Or someone else succumbing, but in a different way? Her words, the frequency, tuning us, sent a fresh wave of dread through me. It suggested something far more deliberate, more orchestrated, than a simple, sticky Thursday. Approximate, 1450 words, Phase 3 total approximate 2,400. Overall total approximate 8,450 words. Elodie's comment about the frequency gnawed at me. Was this anomaly auditory? Subliminal? I started paying more attention to the ambient sounds of Utrecht, the ever-present thrum of city life, the distant car horns, the rumble of trams, the very air itself. Could there be something hidden within it, something I was only now, due to the loop, becoming attuned to? I began to notice the hum she mentioned. It was incredibly subtle, a low-frequency drone that seemed to underpin all other city sounds, like the deepest note of an unseen orchestra. And she was right, it did seem to have a strange, almost vibrational quality that I hadn't consciously registered before. Now, I couldn't unhear it. Sometimes it felt like it was resonating in my teeth, in my bones. The changes in the cafe grew more unsettling. It wasn't just orders or accents anymore. One Thursday, for a period of about an hour, none of the clocks in the cafe worked. Not the digital display on the till, not the old analog clock on the wall. Not even the time displayed on customers' phones when I discreetly glanced at them. They were all frozen, or displaying nonsensical jumbles of numbers. Then, just as suddenly, they all clicked back to the correct, Thursday, time, and no one else seemed to have noticed the lapse. When I hesitantly mentioned to Bram that the clock seemed to have stopped, he just looked at it and said, "Looks fine to me, Leo. Must be your eyes." The chalkboard one morning, instead of the usual Colombian Supremo, displayed a single, perfectly drawn geometric shape, a complex, impossible-looking knot that made my head ache to look at. It was there for perhaps 30 seconds when I first entered the dim cafe, and then, as if an unseen hand had wiped it, it resolved back into the familiar coffee special. My attempt to redraw the knot from memory later resulted in a frustrated, meaningless scrawl. My attempts to find Elodie again and question her further were fruitless. She didn't come into the cafe for the next several Thursdays. Had her comment been a fluke? A momentary lapse into a shared delusion? Or had she, too, been warned off, or worse, fully tuned? My sense of reality was becoming increasingly frayed. Was Utrecht itself changing, or was it just me? I started to wonder if the contagion was less about time looping and more about a perceptual shift, a reality bleed that only a few, like me, and perhaps Elodie and the stranger, were sensitive to. Maybe the Thursday wasn't repeating for everyone, maybe I was just stuck perceiving it that way, my brain unable to process a Friday that was subtly, fundamentally wrong. The idea of tuning led me down another rabbit hole of online research, acoustic resonance, bioacoustics, the effects of infrasound on human perception. Some studies, often on the fringes of accepted science, suggested that certain low frequencies could induce feelings of unease, paranoia, even hallucinations. Could something be broadcasting such a frequency across the city, or parts of it? And why? The stranger's warning, "Don't pull too hard. It can unravel more than you intend," took on a new, more sinister meaning. If I was being tuned, was resistance futile? Or was it the only way to preserve my sanity, myself? I decided I needed to go back to the Widwatersteeg. Despite the fear, despite the explicit warning. Elodie's words, the impossible geometry on the chalkboard, the pervasive hum, it all felt connected, and the alley seemed to be its nexus. If there were answers, or at least a clearer understanding of the threat, they might be found there. This time, I wouldn't just stumble in. I would be prepared. I would observe. On the next Thursday, I took my lunch break with a renewed, albeit terrified, sense of purpose. I had my notebook, my phone, for photos, if anything tangible appeared, and a pounding heart. As I approached the alley, the familiar hum of the city seemed to intensify, resonating uncomfortably in my chest. The entrance to the Widwatersteeg looked darker today, more forbidding. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The silence crashed down again, but this time, it wasn't empty. It was charged, expectant. The air was cold, damp. The wilted red tulip was gone. In its place was a small, smooth gray stone. I didn't approach it immediately. I stayed near the entrance, observing. The graffiti on the walls seemed subtly different from my last visit, new symbols mixed with the old, some resembling the impossible not from the chalkboard. My peripheral vision caught flickers of movement in the deep shadows, too quick to focus on. The whispering started sooner this time, not from the walls, but seeming to emanate from the very air around me. It was still reversed, still unintelligible, but it felt closer. More insistent. I took out my phone, my fingers clumsy. I tried to take a photo of the gray stone, of the graffiti. The phone screen flickered erratically, then displayed a low battery warning, even though it had been fully charged. It then shut down completely. Useless. So much for tangible evidence. I took a few cautious steps further in. The whispering grew louder, resolving into distinct. Overlapping voices, still reversed, but now with an identifiable cadence, a mocking, almost gleeful tone. The pressure in my ears intensified. Then, the far end of the alley, which should have opened onto another small street, began to waver. Like a heat haze, but thicker, more opaque. The view of the street beyond distorted, stretched, then dissolved into a swirling vortex of gray mist. It wasn't an exit anymore. It was something else. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my resolve. This was beyond anything I'd anticipated. The alley wasn't just a thin place, it felt like a wound in the fabric of reality. From the swirling gray mist at the end of the alley, a figure began to coalesce. Tall, indistinct, its form shifting like smoke. It wasn't the stranger from the cafe. This was something older, more alien. It had no discernible features, yet I felt an immense, ancient intelligence emanating from it, cold and utterly indifferent. The reversed whispering solidified, focusing into a single, chilling thought that bloomed directly in my mind, clearer than any spoken word: you are a dissonance. You resist the harmony. Harmony. This creeping dread, this fracturing of time and sanity, this was harmony. The figure took a slow, gliding step towards me. The gray mist roiled behind it. You seek to unravel what is being woven. This is not permitted. The words weren't a threat, not exactly. They were a statement of fact, delivered with an unassailable authority. I felt a terrifying urge to agree, to submit, to let myself be tuned into its grotesque harmony. The hum in my bones intensified, vibrating in sympathy with the figure's presence. I was pulling too hard. And the thread was about to snap. Approximate, 1100 words, Phase 3 total approximate 3500. Overall total approximate 9550 words. I need to ensure Phase 3 reaches around 5000 words before moving to Phase 4. So, more encounters, more insights into the nature of the threat. Perhaps the entity in the alley isn't directly hostile, but its nature is inherently dangerous to Leonie. The figure, if it could be called that, continued its slow advance. The reversed whispering had ceased, replaced by that direct, mental communication. It was terrifyingly intimate, bypassing my ears, my conscious mind, and lodging itself deep within my understanding. The pattern must hold. The echoes are stabilizing. Stabilizing? Or solidifying? Was this repeating Thursday, this subtle decay of normalcy, a prelude to something worse? A new, permanent state of being for Utrecht, or at least this part of it. What pattern? I managed to choke out, my voice a dry rasp. What are you doing? There was no direct answer, only a projection of understanding. Not in words, but in raw concepts. I saw, or rather, perceived, intricate, shifting geometries, like the one on the chalkboard, interlocking, resonating. I felt a sense of immense, slow processes, of a reality being carefully, meticulously recalibrated. And my awareness, my resistance, was a jarring note in this complex, alien symphony. I was a glitch in its matrix. The figure was closer now. I could feel a coldness radiating from it, a profound otherness that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the cobblestones. You are not meant to perceive this deeply. Your awareness is an anomaly. It raised a shadowy appendage, and the gray stone I'd seen earlier lifted from the ground, hovering in the air between us. It began to glow with a faint, internal light. This can be corrected. You can be harmonized. The implication was clear. Surrender my perception, my resistance, and be absorbed into the new pattern. Become like Bram, like the others, blissfully unaware in a subtly altered world. The hum in my bones pulsed, a siren song of acceptance, of peace. For a horrifying moment, it sounded tempting. The exhaustion of constant vigilance, the terror of isolation, it could all end. But then I remembered the flicker of true life in Elodie's eyes before she'd succumbed, the fleeting moments of genuine connection I'd had with the real Meneer Bakker, the real Mevrouw de Vries. The taste of coffee on a true Friday morning. These were not things I was willing to let go of, not without a fight, however futile. No, I said, the word surprisingly firm. I won't be harmonized. The figure paused. The glowing stone pulsed faster. The mental voice took on a new quality, not anger, but perhaps disappointment. Or the equivalent of a system encountering an unexpected error. Resistance is inefficient. It creates instability. Then let it be unstable. I cried, a surge of desperate defiance flaring within me. This isn't harmony, it's erasure. The air in the alley crackled. The swirling gray mist at the far end seemed to darken, to churn more violently. The figure didn't move, but I felt an immense pressure build around me, as if the alley itself was trying to squeeze the resistance out of me. My vision began to tunnel. The hum became a deafening roar in my head. I felt my consciousness starting to fray, to detach. This was it. I had pulled too hard. Then, another voice, sharp and urgent, cut through the mental cacophony. Leonie. Get out of there. Now. I blinked, disoriented. The voice was real, spoken, not projected. Standing at the sunlit entrance to the Witwaterssteeg, silhouetted against the brightness of the Uitgracht, was the stranger from the café. His pale gray eyes were wide with alarm. He was holding something in his hand, something small and metallic that glinted in the light. The shadowy figure in the alley turned its head slowly towards the newcomer. The mental pressure on me eased slightly. Another dissonance, the entity projected, a note of something akin to annoyance now present. Leave her alone, the stranger said, his voice steady despite the tremor I could detect in it. He took a step into the alley. She's not part of your weave. He raised the object in his hand. It looked like an old-fashioned tuning fork. He struck it sharply against his other palm. A clear, high-pitched tone rang out, piercingly pure. It cut through the oppressive hum, through the mental static. The effect was immediate and violent. The shadowy figure recoiled, its form flickering wildly. The swirling gray mist behind it pulsed erratically. The glowing stone fell to the ground with a clatter, its light extinguished. The mental voice screamed, a silent, psychic shriek of agony and disruption. Interference. The pattern is compromised. The stranger struck the tuning fork again. The pure note resonated, seeming to push back the oppressive atmosphere of the alley. "Run, Leonie," he yelled. The spell that had held me captive broke. I scrambled backwards, stumbling, then turned and fled towards the light, towards the stranger. As I burst out of the Widwatersteig, I risked a glance back. The shadowy figure was dissolving, its form unraveling like smoke in a strong wind, sucked back into the churning gray vortex at the end of the alley. The vortex itself seemed to be collapsing, shrinking, the alley walls flickering as if struggling to maintain their solidity. The stranger was backing out slowly, the tuning fork still held aloft, its clear note a shield against the chaos. He grabbed my arm as I reached him, pulling me further away from the alley entrance. "Are you all right?" he asked, his face pale and strained. I think so," I gasped, shaking uncontrollably. What was that? Who are you?" "No time," he said curtly, glancing back at the alley, where the entrance now looked just like any other dark passage, the oppressive atmosphere gone, the silence ordinary. "We need to move. It knows you now. It knows you resist. It knows you now." The word sent a fresh chill down my spine, colder than any alleyway. My brief defiance had marked me. Approximate, 1150 words for this section. Phase 3 total, minus 4,650. Close enough to 5K for Phase 3. Overall, minus 10,700. Phase 4. Confrontation/revelation and aftermath. The stranger didn't let go of my arm. He hurried me along the Outgracht, away from the Widwatersteig, his grip surprisingly strong. People gave us curious glances, a pale, disheveled woman being half-dragged by an intense-looking man, but no one intervened. The ordinary Thursday city life flowed around us, oblivious. "Where are we going?" I panted, struggling to keep up. "Somewhere, quieter," he said, his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. "Somewhere the signal is weaker." "Signal?" "Like Elodie's frequency." He led me through a labyrinth of smaller streets and canals, places I barely knew existed despite living in Utrecht for years. Finally, we reached a small, unassuming hof, a hidden courtyard surrounded by old almshouses, an oasis of green tranquility amidst the urban sprawl. An iron gate, slightly ajar, was its only entrance. He guided me through. Inside, the roar of the city faded to a gentle murmur. Flowers bloomed in neat little gardens. An ancient tree cast dappled shade. It felt insulated. "We should be relatively safe here for a moment," he said, finally releasing my arm. He leaned against the old brick wall, taking deep breaths. The tuning fork was now tucked into his jacket pocket. "Safe from what?" I demanded, my voice still shaky but laced with a new urgency. "What was that thing in the alley? What is happening to this city? To Thursday?" He looked at me, his pale gray eyes searching. "How much do you understand already?" "I know the day is repeating, or seems to be. I know things are changing, subtly. People's memories, their behaviors. I found a book that mentioned echo days. I met a student, Elodie, who talked about a frequency, about being tuned. And that thing in the alley, it said I was a dissonance, that I was resisting the harmony. He nodded slowly. "You see more than most. More than is healthy, perhaps." He sighed. "My name is Thomas. And I suppose you could call me a watcher. Or maybe just another anomaly." "A watcher of what?" "Of the weavers," he said, his gaze distant. "The entity you encountered, it's one of them. Or a tendril of something larger. They are not from here. Not from our conventional understanding of reality. Extradimensional bleed-through. The phrase from my frantic online searches came to mind. It had seemed so outlandish then. Now. And they're weaving what? This repeating Thursday. Why? Thomas ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. It's complex. And I only have pieces. Think of reality, our shared perception of it, as a fabric. Sometimes, that fabric wears thin in places. Utrecht, parts of Utrecht, especially around the old canals, are very thin places. And sometimes, things from outside can press through. He gestured vaguely. They don't experience time linearly, like we do. They perceive patterns, resonances. What you're experiencing as a repeating Thursday, for them, it's an attempt to establish a new pattern, a new resonance. To tune this area, this city, to their own frequency. To make it more compatible. Compatible for what? I whispered, horrified. Inhabitation, perhaps. Or simply to reshape it into something that makes sense to them. I don't know their ultimate goal. They don't think in terms of goals we'd understand. His voice was grim. The repeating day, the subtle behavioral shifts, the memory alterations, those are side effects of the tuning process. Or perhaps deliberate adjustments to make the population more receptive. The pieces clicked into place, forming a terrifying mosaic. The chalkboard, the accents, the flickering lights, Elodie's tuning, the entity in the alley. It was all part of it. And the Widwatersteeg? A focal point. An anchor they're using. There are probably others. Places where the veil is thinnest. He looked at me pointedly. And you, by resisting, by noticing, you create interference. You disrupt their weave. That makes you a problem for them. The tuning fork. I asked, remembering the clear, piercing note. An old trick, he said with a faint, weary smile. Certain frequencies disrupt their cohesion. Throws a spanner in their works, temporarily. It's not a weapon, not really. More like a way to momentarily shout louder than they can hum. So, this has happened before. Variations of it. In other places, other times. Usually smaller scale, more localized. This feels bigger. More determined. He looked deeply troubled. And your awareness, Leonie, is both a danger and, potentially, a key. A key to what? Stopping it? Or just surviving it? Why me? I asked, the question that had haunted me for weeks. Why do I see it when Bram, Mevrouw de Vries, almost everyone else, doesn't? Thomas shrugged. Sensitivity. Random chance. Maybe you were just in the right place at the wrong time when the tuning began. Or maybe there's something about your own, personal frequency that makes you less susceptible, more prone to noticing the dissonance. He paused. The fact that you dreamt of Fridays, that suggests a strong tether to the old pattern. The quiet of the Hoft was a stark contrast to the cosmic horror of his explanation. So, what now? I asked, feeling a profound weariness settle over me. Can we stop them? Thomas looked down, tracing a pattern on the cobblestones with his shoe. Stop them? Unlikely. They are vast, ancient. We are gnats buzzing around a giant. What we can do is resist. Disrupt. Try to protect what little pockets of the old reality we can. And try to stay out of their direct path. He looked up, his gaze intense. You faced one directly. That was incredibly dangerous. They will likely try to correct you more forcefully now. The mental image of the shadowy figure, the offer to be harmonized, returned with chilling clarity. What about the stranger in the cafe? The one who warned me? I suddenly remembered. Was that you? He shook his head. No. There are others. Some who are aware. Some who, like me, try to mitigate the effects. Some who might even be trying to help them, for their own reasons. It's not a simple conflict. The complexity was overwhelming. My small, repeating Thursday had become a battleground for forces beyond my comprehension. So, I just, keep resisting. I asked. Keep noticing. Keep being at dissonance. It's the only way to stay yourself, Thomas said softly. But it will be harder now. They'll adapt. The loop might change, become more insidious, or the pressure to conform will increase. He pushed himself off the wall. I can't stay. I've interfered enough for one cycle. It draws too much attention. But you need to be careful, Leonie. Very careful. Where will you go? There are other, thin places. Other dissonances to find. He gave me another of those faint, weary smiles. Keep your journal. Document everything. Your awareness is a shield, of sorts. And perhaps, find others like Elodie. If you can wake them, even for a moment, it creates more interference. He turned to leave the Hofje. Thomas. I called after him. Will I see you again? He paused at the gate. If the pattern allows. Or if you need me badly enough. Some connections, once made, resonate. He hesitated. The alley, the Widwatersteeg, it will be active again. But they know you've been there. Be wary. And then he was gone, slipping out of the gate and disappearing back into the city. I was alone again, but not in the same way. The horror was no longer formless, it had a name, a nature, however alien. And I had a purpose, however daunting, to resist. To stay dissonant. I left the quiet sanctuary of the Hofje, stepping back into the familiar, yet now terrifyingly alien, streets of Utrecht. The hum of the city seemed louder, more insistent. Every passing face was a question, were they tuned? Were they part of the new harmony? The café, when I returned, was just as it had been. Bram was humming, Meneer Bakker was reading his paper, this time, with a thick Irish brogue, discussing the price of potatoes, Mevrouw de Vries was lamenting a lost earring. The mundane horror of it was almost comforting after the cosmic dread of the alley. But something had shifted. The chalkboard, when I'd left, had displayed the Colombian Supremo. Now, it was blank. Utterly, unnaturally blank. Not wiped clean. But as if no chalk had ever touched its surface. Bram didn't notice. No one did. But I knew. It was a message. My defiance in the alley, Thomas's intervention, it had consequences. The pattern was adjusting. The game was changing. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of my apartment building, every distant siren, seemed to be part of the frequency. My phone, when I dared to look, still read Thursday, October 12th. But it felt like a different Thursday now. A more dangerous one. I clutched my journal, its pages filled with my frantic observations. Thomas had said it was a shield. I hoped he was right. The following Thursday, or the next iteration of the endless Thursday, was quiet. Too quiet. The anomalies were less pronounced. Meneer Bakker spoke normal Dutch. Mevrouw de Vries ordered her standard cappuccino. Bram was his usual, unflustered self. The lights didn't flicker. The shadows behaved. It was unervingly normal. Had they given up? Had Thomas's intervention worked more thoroughly than he'd thought? Or was this the new tactic? Lull me into a false sense of security. Make me doubt my own memories of the chaos, the entity, Thomas himself. The subtle wrongness was still there, though, if I looked hard enough. A certain glassy-eyed compliance in some customers. A slight, almost imperceptible slowing of conversations, as if people were speaking from a script they were only just remembering. The hum was fainter, but it hadn't gone away. It was more insidious. weaving itself more seamlessly into the background. Then, towards the end of the day, as I was wiping down the counter, I saw him. Not Thomas. The original stranger. The very first one who had spoken to me in the cafe, who had warned me about sticky Thursdays and not pulling too hard. He was sitting at a corner table, a cup of tea untouched before him. He hadn't been there moments before. He simply was. He met my eyes, and a slow, chilling smile spread across his face. It wasn't a kind smile. "You pulled, didn't you?" he said, his voice soft, carrying across the quiet cafe. "You pulled very hard indeed." He gestured with his chin towards the window. Outside, the familiar Utrecht street scene, the canal, the cyclists, the old houses, seemed to shimmer, just for a second, like a poorly tuned television screen. The colors desaturated slightly, then snapped back. "The weavers are patient," he continued, his smile widening. "They have all the time in the world. Or, they will soon." He picked up his teacup. "And some of us appreciate a well-woven tapestry. Even if a few old threads have to be snipped." My blood ran cold. He wasn't a watcher like Thomas. He wasn't an ally. He was one of them. Or worse, a human collaborator. "The harmony is almost complete," he said, almost crooning. "Soon, it will be a perfect Thursday. Every Thursday." He took a sip of his tea. "And you, my dear Leonie, will either find your place in the chorus, or you will be silenced." His eyes, which I'd once thought were just pale gray, now seemed to hold an unnatural, shimmering depth, reflecting the distorted light from the window. The confrontation wasn't over. It was just beginning. And the true scale of the threat, its insidious reach into the very fabric of my world, was finally, horrifyingly clear. Approximate, 2,200 words for Phase 4. Overall total minus 12,900 words. This is feeling more like the confrontation is with this human agent of the weavers, which is a good climax for this phase. The ending needs to be resonant and unsettling. To reach 20,000 words, I need to expand all phases. Phase 1, more subtle hints, more of Leonie's daily life and internal thoughts before the anomalies become undeniable. Establish her relationships more. Phase 2, more failed attempts to communicate, more detail on her research, perhaps she tries to document things with photos/videos and they get corrupted or change. The dreams of Friday could be more elaborate. Phase 3, more interactions with Elodie, or finding other small clues. The exploration of the Widwatersteig and the encounter with the entity could be more drawn out, more psychologically taxing. Thomas's appearance and explanation could be more detailed. Phase 4, the interaction with the collaborator, stranger could be a longer, more chilling conversation. The ending itself needs careful crafting for impact. Let's assume the word count requirements per phase are more like guidelines for pacing and I should focus on hitting the overall target. I'll expand from here, focusing on deepening the existing scenes and adding smaller interstitial moments to build dread and detail. Continuing from the collaborator, stranger's appearance. His words hung in the air, heavy and cloying as the unnaturally sweet scent that suddenly seemed to emanate from the untouched tea before him. Silenced. It wasn't a shout, but a promise whispered in the quiet cafe, more terrifying than any overt threat. "Who are you?" I managed, my voice barely a breath. "A connoisseur," he replied, his eyes glinting. "An admirer of elegant patterns. And this is their most elegant work yet." He gestured expansively with one hand, encompassing the cafe, the street outside, perhaps the whole city. A self-repairing, self-perfecting moment. A Thursday distilled to its purest essence, forever. "It's a nightmare," I said, a tremor in my voice. "Perspective, my dear. For a frayed reality, it is a soothing balm. A perfect, predictable, harmonious loop." His smile didn't reach his eyes, which remained fixed on me with an intensity that felt like physical pressure. "Most will adapt. They already are. Their rough edges smoothed, their anxieties quieted. They will be content in the eternal Thursday. Content like zombies? He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Such a dramatic word. No, not zombies. Just, attuned. Free from the burden of unpredictable futures and messy, contradictory pasts. Don't you ever wish for such peace, Leonie? For a day where everything is known, everything is, right? His words were insidious, trying to find a crack in my resolve. And I was tired. So incredibly tired of fighting, of being the only one who saw the seams of reality tearing. The only thing right is the truth, I said, clutching the edge of the counter for support. And this isn't it. Truth is merely the dominant signal, he countered smoothly. And the signal is changing. Can you hear it? The new song. It's so much more beautiful. The hum, the pervasive frequency Thomas had warned me about, seemed to swell in that moment, pressing in on me, trying to lull my mind into acceptance. I shook my head, trying to clear the mental fog. Thomas. The stranger's smile tightened. Ah, the little meddler with his forks and his discordant notes. He only delays the inevitable. He cannot stop the loom. No one can. But I can resist, I said, finding a sliver of defiance. We can. You can try, he conceded, a hint of something almost pitying in his tone. You can beat your fists against the inevitable tide. Or you can learn to float. The choice, for a little while longer, is yours. He stood up, smoothly. But the tide is rising, Leonie. And even the strongest swimmers eventually tire. He placed a few coins on the table, old guilders, currency that hadn't been used in decades. Then, he walked towards the door. Enjoy your Thursdays, he said, without looking back. The bell chimed as he left. The sweet, cloying scent faded with him. The old guilders on the table seemed to mock me. I stood there, shaking, long after he was gone. Bran came out from the kitchen. Everything all right, Leo? You look like you've seen a ghost. Just, a strange customer, I mumbled. He wouldn't remember. The conversation, the guilders, the chilling warning, they would be smoothed over, absorbed by the looping, self-correcting Thursday. But I would remember. I wrote it all down, every word, every nuance, in my journal that night. The journal was becoming my ark, preserving the fragments of a drowning reality. The days, the Thursdays, continued. The collaborators' words proved prophetic. The harmony grew stronger, the loop more seamless. The overt anomalies, the jarring shifts in accent or orders, lessened. Instead, there was a creeping placidity, a subtle erosion of individuality. Conversations became more generic, opinions more uniform. The vibrant chaos of Utrecht was being subtly muted. Its colors toned down, its sharp edges sanded smooth. People smiled more, but their smiles didn't always reach their eyes. They were polite, accommodating, but there was a lack of spark. The city was becoming a beautiful, perfectly preserved, lifeless diorama. My resistance became a quiet, internal war. I focused on the small things. I would deliberately use an older, less common Dutch phrase in conversation, and watch for the flicker of confusion before the placid smile returned. I would hum a snatch of a song that hadn't been popular for years. Tiny acts of dissonance. Tiny reminders of a richer, more chaotic reality. I tried to find Elodie again, but her usual haunts were empty. Had she been fully tuned? Or had she, too, found a way to disappear, to resist in her own way? Thomas did not reappear. Sometimes, in moments of deep despair, I wondered if he, and the entity in the alley, had been hallucinations, products of my own fracturing mind. But the collaborator's visit had been too real, too chillingly specific. He knew about Thomas. He knew about the Weavers. My dreams of Friday faded completely. Now, when I slept, I dreamt of the loom Thomas had spoken of, vast and cosmic, its shuttles weaving the fabric of Thursday, over and over. And I saw myself as a single, broken thread, snagging the mechanism, threatening the integrity of the pattern. One Thursday, months into this timeless existence, or perhaps it was only weeks, how could I tell? I was walking home from the cafe. The city was bathed in the golden light of a perpetual late afternoon. It was beautiful. And utterly, soul-crushingly wrong. I passed the Widwatersteeg. I hadn't dared go near it since my encounter with the entity and Thomas's rescue. But today, something drew me. I hesitated at its entrance. The air within no longer felt charged or overtly menacing. It was just, quiet. Empty. I stepped inside. The graffiti was still there, the impossible knot still visible beneath newer tags. There was no visible entity, no swirling mist. But the hum was strong here. Very strong. It resonated deep in my chest, a silent throb that felt like the heartbeat of this new, altered Utrecht. I walked to the spot where the gray stone had lain, where the entity had manifested. I reached out and touched the cold, damp brick of the wall. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt it. The vast, alien consciousness of the weavers. Not hostile, not directly. Just, present. Immense. And within it, I felt the countless, tiny consciousnesses of Utrecht, all humming in unison, part of the great, peaceful, terrible harmony. I could let go. I could join them. The thought was a seductive whisper. Peace. An end to the struggle. My hand trembled against the wall. Then, I remembered Thomas's words, "Your awareness is a shield." I remembered the collaborator's chilling smile, "You will either find your place in the chorus, or you will be silenced." I pulled my hand back from the wall as if burned. "No," I whispered into the empty alley. "Not yet." I turned and walked out of the Widwatersteeg, back into the golden, unending afternoon of Thursday. The struggle was not over. I was still a dissonance. A tiny, flickering spark of resistance in the face of an overwhelming, quiet contagion. I didn't know if I could win. I didn't even know what winning would look like. Maybe there was no escape from the eternal Thursday. Maybe the best I could hope for was to remain myself, a stubbornly broken thread in their perfect tapestry, a silent witness to a world slowly, beautifully, terrifyingly remade. As I walked towards my apartment, the bells of the Dom Tower began to chime. The sound was clear, resonant, achingly familiar. But as I listened, I noticed a new undertone, a subtle harmonic that hadn't been there before. A note that blended perfectly with the ever-present hum of the city. The tuning was becoming more refined. I clutched my journal tighter. Tomorrow would be Thursday. And I would be ready. Or I would try to be. The quiet contagion continued, and I, for now, continued with it, a solitary observer on a day that would never end. Approximate, 1,500 words for final section of Phase 4. Total approximate 14,400. To reach 20K, I need to significantly expand earlier phases. Let's flesh out Phase 1 more, adding more detail to Leonie's ordinary life, her personality, and making the initial anomalies even more subtle and dismissible. Expanding Phase 1, targeting an additional 1,500 to 2,000 words for this phase. The scent of de Oude Lantern was my morning anchor, a blend of dark roast, warm yeast from Bram's early baking, the faint lemony tang of the polish I used on the wooden tables, and underlying it all, the old, comforting smell of Utrecht itself, damp stone, canal water, and centuries of human habitation. I loved that smell. It meant routine, purpose, a place in the world. My own small apartment, a third-floor walk-up overlooking a quiet, tree-lined gracht, was my sanctuary. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Filled with second-hand books, thriving houseplants I talked to probably more than I should, and a perpetually messy art corner where I dabbled with watercolors, mostly painting scenes of Utrecht that never quite captured the light I saw in my head. I was, by nature, an observer, someone who noticed the tiny details, the way a pigeon strutted with a missing toe, the intricate patterns of lichen on an old brick wall, the exact shade of despair in a tourist's eyes when they realized they'd mistaken the train to Amsterdam. This tendency towards minutiae served me well as a barista, remembering regulars' quirks, anticipating their orders, but sometimes, I knew, it made me prone to overthinking. My mother used to say I could find a conspiracy in a dropped teacup. Bram was my foil in many ways. Where I was introspective and sometimes prone to melancholy, he was relentlessly optimistic, his energy infectious. We'd worked together for 3 years, a comfortable partnership built on shared coffee addictions and an unspoken agreement not to discuss politics before 9 a.m. He was the heart of the cafe's warmth, his booming laugh and genuine interest in people's lives drawing customers in as much as his famous appeltart. That first Thursday, the one that now felt like a faded photograph from a forgotten lifetime, had started like any other. I'd meticulously arranged the display of Koffiekoeken, almond paste-filled, sugar-dusted pastries, their sweetness a perfect counterpoint to the bitter coffee. I'd even managed to get the foam on my practice latte to form a passable, if slightly lopsided, heart. Small victories. The chalkboard incident was the first tiny pebble. When Bram denied changing it, I'd mentally run through other possibilities. Had I been that tired when I'd written it the day before? Had I perhaps dreamt of writing about the Yirgacheffe, and confused dream with reality? It was plausible. I'd been sleeping poorly, a low-grade anxiety about an upcoming rent review buzzing beneath the surface of my days. Probably just me, I'd conceded to Bram, wiping the slate clean with more force than necessary. The Colombian Supremo was fine. People liked it. It didn't really matter. Meneer Bakker's fleeting German accent later that morning was another such pebble. He was an educated man, a lover of languages. Perhaps he was practicing for a trip, or merely amusing himself. When I'd handed him his coffee, I'd ventured, planning a trip to Germany, Meneer Bakker. He'd looked up from his paper, his brow furrowed slightly. Germany? No, my dear. Why do you ask? His Dutch was impeccable, as always. I'd felt a blush creep up my neck. Oh, no reason. Just thought I heard, never mind. He'd given me a polite, slightly puzzled smile and returned to his reading. Coincidence. My ears playing tricks. And Mevrouw de Vries, with her sudden craving for Earl Grey instead of her usual cappuccino, well, people changed their minds. Women especially. She might have giggled, were allowed to be fickle. When I'd expressed mild surprise, oh, Earl Grey today, Mevrouw de Vries. She'd patted my hand. Yes, dear. A good strong cup. Always sets me right on a Thursday. Always, I was sure it wasn't always dash. But memory is a slippery thing. Perhaps my own was the one at fault. I'd even made a mental note to pay more attention, to not assume so rigidly. These were the small things, the easily dismissible tremors before the earthquake. Anya, the student, and her flat white. A delivery driver who usually whistled a particular pop song, today humming a classical sonata. Each instance, taken alone, was nothing. A quirk, a momentary lapse, a personal choice. My brain, ever eager to find patterns, was perhaps just stringing together unrelated coincidences, trying to make sense of a world that was inherently a little chaotic. I told myself I was being fanciful, letting my imagination run away with me. I was probably just tired, stressed about money, reading too many strange articles online late at night. The end of that first Thursday had Bram making his "thank goodness it's almost Friday" comment. When I corrected him, he'd laughed it off easily. Wishful thinking, Leo. My brain's already on weekend mode. And I'd laughed with him. It was a common enough sentiment. Nothing strange there. The only truly odd thing was the persistent, faint feeling that I'd had that exact exchange before, the words echoing with a familiarity I couldn't quite place. Déjà vu. Everyone gets that. When I woke up the next morning, and my phone insisted it was still Thursday, October 12th, my first reaction wasn't panic, but irritation. "Stupid phone," I'd muttered, tapping the screen. I restarted it. The date remained. I checked my laptop. Thursday, October 12th. This was a more significant pebble. This was harder to dismiss. My digital devices, usually so reliable, were conspiring. Or, more likely, there was some bizarre network glitch, some server error affecting the date display. It had to be. The alternative was too unthinkable. It was only when Bram repeated his "sunshine" greeting verbatim, and I saw the Colombian Supremo back on the chalkboard, that the irritation began to curdle into genuine unease. Even then, I tried to rationalize. Bram was a creature of habit, maybe he used that greeting often when it was gray. And the chalkboard, maybe he'd seen my Yurgachev special, decided it wasn't selling, or the boss had texted him, and he'd changed it back after I left, forgetting to tell me. It was a stretch, but still within the realm of strained possibility. The changing accents of Meneer Bakker, the wildly fluctuating usuals of Mevrouw de Vries on that second Thursday, these were the moments the rationalizations began to crumble. When Mr. Bakker spoke Afrikaans, I actually asked him, "Have you been to South Africa recently, Meneer Bakker?" He looked at me as if I'd grown a second head. "South Africa, child? Good heavens, no. Not for 50 years. Whatever gave you that idea?" Then he'd seamlessly continued his order in perfect Dutch. I felt small, foolish, like I was losing my grip on simple, everyday interactions. Each denial, each placid dismissal from the people around me, chipped away at my confidence in my own perceptions. They weren't just disagreeing with me, they were looking at me with a kind of gentle pity, as if I were unwell, confused. And the more they did that, the more I began to wonder if they were right. Approximate, 1050 new words in Phase 1. Total for Phase 1 minus 2030. Overall story minus 15,450. This expansion helps to ground Leone and the initial subtlety. Now to expand Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. Target another 1,500 to 2,000 words for this phase. Expanding Phase 2, targeting an additional 1,500 to 2,000 words for this phase. The third Thursday, or the third iteration of the same Thursday, was when the dull unease solidified into a cold, hard knot of dread. My attempts to rationalize were failing, overwhelmed by the sheer consistency of the inconsistencies. My meticulous nature, usually a source of quiet pride, now felt like a curse, forcing me to see the cracks in a reality everyone else perceived as smooth and whole. My journal, initially a place to vent minor workplace frustrations, transformed into a logbook of the impossible. I started noting down not just the glaring anomalies, but the minutiae surrounding them, the exact time on my phone, always Thursday, always progressing normally, within the 24-hour cycle before resetting, the weather, which did vary slightly from one Thursday to the next, one might be drizzly, another overcast, a third surprisingly sunny, proving it wasn't an identical carbon copy, even the headlines on the newspapers Meneer Bakker brought, which also seemed to update, reflecting a world that was moving on, even if my immediate environment wasn't. This was one of the most disorienting aspects, the wider world, glimpsed through news and online sources that I compulsively checked, seemed to be proceeding. Flights were landing, politicians were speaking, distant wars continued. It was my little bubble, my Utrecht, or perhaps just my cafe and its immediate surroundings, that was caught in this temporal stutter. Or was it just my perception of it? The Friday the 13th comment from the customer with the laptop became a focal point of my early, frantic investigation. The next Thursday, I made sure to be near her when she set up. She came in at the same time, ordered the same croissant. "Excuse me," I asked, trying to sound casual, "could you tell me the date? My phone's been acting a bit strange." She smiled brightly. "Of course. It's Thursday the 12th. She tapped her laptop screen. "All set for the pre-weekend wind down. No mention of Friday the 13th. No flicker of recognition when I subtly probed. Had I misheard her the first time? Or was her reality as pliable as everyone else's, resetting and reconfiguring with each iteration of the loop? I surreptitiously glanced at other customers' phones when they left them on tables. Most showed Thursday 12th. But one, belonging to a businessman engrossed in a call, clearly displayed Friday 12th, an impossible date combination. He didn't seem to notice or care. The inconsistency was maddening. Were we all living in slightly desynchronized realities, and I was the only one whose desync was catastrophically large? My attempts to communicate my distress to Bram became more pointed, and his reactions more unsettling. "Bram," I said one Thursday, my voice tight with desperation, "Meneer Bakker just ordered in fluent German. Yesterday it was Afrikaans. The day before, it was normal Dutch. Don't you find that odd?" Bram paused in the act of wiping down the milk steamer. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of concern and profound bewilderment. "Leonie, what are you talking about? Meneer Bakker always speaks Dutch. Maybe a little formal sometimes, but always Dutch. Are you feeling all right? You've been very on edge lately." He then added, with a forced chuckle, "Too much strong coffee, perhaps." His denial was so absolute, so devoid of any shared recollection, that it felt like a physical blow. It wasn't just that he didn't remember, it was that my reality was actively, demonstrably false to him. This was the heart of the isolation, not just being alone with my experience, but being told my experience wasn't even happening. I tried to capture evidence. One Thursday, I propped my phone up discreetly, angled to film the chalkboard after I'd written the Yurgachev special. I left it recording as I went about my morning tasks. When I checked the footage later that day, it showed me writing, the Colombian Supremo. My own hand, my own chalk, forming the words I was trying to disprove. The video was a perfect, seamless recording of an event that, according to my own memory, hadn't happened that way. The loop wasn't just resetting the physical world, it was retroactively editing any attempt to document its inconsistencies. Or my phone, too, was part of the contagion. The dreams of Friday became more elaborate, more cruelly tantalizing. They weren't just snapshots of normalcy anymore. They were full, detailed days. In one, I had a long, heartfelt conversation with my sister on the phone, making plans to visit her the following month. I woke up with the phantom sensation of the phone against my ear. Tears streaming down my face, the Thursday date on my phone a brutal negation of that connection, that future. Did my sister, in her reality, wonder why I never called? The stranger's appearance was a cataclysmic shift. His quiet words, "Some Thursdays are just sticky," were the first external validation, however cryptic, that I wasn't completely insane. His warning, "Don't pull too hard," resonated with a primal fear I hadn't yet been able to name. After he left, I'd grabbed Bram. "Who was that man? What did he say to you?" Bram had just looked blank. "What man, Leo? Has anyone unusual been in?" The stranger, too, was subject to the loop's erasure, at least for Bram. But for me, his words were branded onto my consciousness. The subtle environmental warping began after his visit, as if his acknowledgement of the anomaly had somehow made me more sensitive to its subtler manifestations, or perhaps his very presence had disturbed the fragile equilibrium. The flickering light above the pastry case, pulsing its short long rhythm, became a maddening, silent communication I couldn't decipher. Was it a warning? A message? Or just another symptom of the degrading reality? I'd try to time the flickers, write down the patterns, but they were inconsistent, shifting, always just beyond the grasp of meaning. One afternoon, I was staring at a small, framed print of a Vermeer painting that hung near the toilets. I was sure, absolutely certain, that the previous Thursday, the woman in the painting had been facing left. Today, she was facing right. I spun around, looking for Bram, then stopped myself. What was the point? He'd just tell me it had always been that way. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up. I was being gaslit by Vermeer. My online research became a desperate hunt for anything, anyone, that could explain this quiet, insidious unraveling. I typed in increasingly bizarre search terms: localized time loop, collective memory fabrication, Utrecht anomaly, perceptual contagions. Most results were fiction, creepypastas, or conspiracy theories that felt too loud, too overtly malicious for the subtle, almost gentle horror I was experiencing. There was no dramatic evil, no monsters, just a persistent, smiling denial of my reality. The true horror was in its quietness, its reasonableness to everyone but me. The world hadn't ended, it had just hiccuped, and I was the only one who'd noticed everyone else was stuck in the replay. One evening, after another identical Thursday, I sat in my apartment, the city lights reflecting in the canal outside my window, and I wept. Not for the lost Fridays, but for my lost self, the Leonie who had trusted her own mind, who had felt connected to the world around her. That Leonie was fading, replaced by a paranoid, exhausted stranger I barely recognized. The quiet contagion wasn't just changing the world, it was changing me. And the thought that terrified me most was, what if, eventually, I stopped noticing? What if the stickiness of Thursday finally wore me down, and I, too, began to greet each morning with a placid smile, oblivious to the beautiful, terrible trap I was in? Approximate, 1350 new words in Phase 2. Total for Phase 2 minus 6,350. Overall story minus 16,800. This is getting closer to the target. The pacing feels better with more detailed build-up. Now to expand Phase 3, focusing on the investigation of De Echo Dagen, the Witwatersrand, Elodie, and the encounter with Thomas. Target another 1,500 to 2,000 words. Expanding Phase 3, targeting an additional 1,500 to 2,000 words for this phase. The discovery of De Echo Dagen, in that dusty, forgotten book was like finding a flickering candle in an infinite darkness. It was tenuous, yes, based on centuries-old folklore, but it was the first external reference, however archaic, that resonated with my experience. A loosening of one's temporal anchor. The phrase described perfectly the sensation of drifting, unmoored, in a sea of repeating Thursdays. The Witwatersrand, a place where time might sometimes snag on a crooked nail. It became my obsessive focus, a potential ground zero. Before I dared to visit the alley, I tried to find Elodie again. The student with the focused eyes and the whispered comment about the frequency and tuning. If she was also sensitive, perhaps she knew more. For several Thursdays, I scanned the cafe anxiously, but her usual corner table remained empty. Had she graduated? Moved away? Or had her brief moment of lucidity been a fluke, a random spike in the general noise? Or worse, had she been silenced? The uncertainty gnawed at me. Then, one Thursday, she was there. Hunched over her laptop, a half-empty cup of tea beside her. I approached cautiously, my heart thumping. "Elodie," I said softly. She looked up, her eyes vague, unfocused. "Oh, hi Leonie. Can I get a refill?" Her voice was its usual timid murmur. Disappointment crashed over me. Of course. I took her cup. As I turned to go, I hesitated. "Elodie," I said, my voice low, "do you remember talking to me last week? About the city's hum?" She frowned, a flicker of something, confusion. Annoyance? In her eyes before they smoothed over into blank politeness. The hum? I don't think so. Was it about the construction noise down the street? It can be a bit much sometimes. She didn't remember. Or she wouldn't. The window of connection, if it had ever truly been open, was now firmly shut. I refilled her tea, a profound sense of discouragement settling over me. If even those who showed glimmers of awareness were so easily subsumed, what hope was there for me? This failure with Elodie solidified my resolve to investigate the Witwatersrand. It was my only remaining lead. The fear was immense, the stranger's warning a constant refrain in my mind. But the alternative, this slow erosion of self in a placidly insane world, was becoming unbearable. My first visit to the alley, with its oppressive silence, the wilted tulip, the brief shimmer in the air, and the terrifying, indecipherable whispering from the walls, had confirmed its wrongness. The mental image of the chalkboard message, GAWEG, was a clear deterrent. But it was also a confirmation, something was here. Something aware. The hum Elodie had mentioned, I became acutely aware of it after she spoke. It wasn't just a background noise, it felt structural. As if the very bones of the city were vibrating at a specific, unnatural frequency. Some Thursdays it was a barely perceptible thrum, on others, especially when I was tired or stressed, it seemed to escalate into a distinct pressure in my sinuses, a subtle disorientation that made the world feel slightly tilted. Was this the tuning mechanism? A city-wide, low-frequency broadcast designed to subtly alter perception, to make the population more receptive to the new harmony? The idea was monstrous, yet it fit the quiet, insidious nature of the contagion. My second visit to the Widwatersteeg, the one where I encountered the shadowy entity, was born of a desperate need to understand more, to confront the source, however terrifying. The alley felt different that day, more actively hostile. The graffiti seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision, the impossible knots pulsing with a faint, unhealthy light. The phone dying, the swirling gray mist, the coalescing figure, it was like stepping into a waking nightmare. The entity's mental communication was the most violating aspect. No sound, no words, just pure, raw concepts projected directly into my mind. You are a dissonance. You resist the harmony. The pattern must hold. The echoes are stabilizing, it wasn't conversing, it was diagnosing, categorizing me as an error in its vast, alien system. Its offer to correct me, to harmonize me, was chillingly seductive. For a fleeting moment, the thought of peace, of an end to the struggle, was almost irresistible. The constant vigilance, the gnawing fear, the crushing isolation, it could all vanish. I could become like Bram, like Mevrouw de Vries, living in blissful, ignorant contentment within the perfect Thursday. The hum in my bones seemed to throb in agreement, urging me to surrender. It was the memory of tiny, specific beauties, the exact blue of a Delft tile, the complex bitterness of a perfect espresso, the way sunlight fractured through the leaves of the trees along the canal on it real. Spring morning, a memory now so distant it felt like a dream, that anchored me. These were textures of a reality worth fighting for, even if all I could do was bear witness to its erasure. My no was almost a surprise to myself, a small, desperate act of self-preservation. Thomas's sudden appearance, his tuning fork cutting through the entity's oppressive presence, was nothing short of miraculous. He was real. The stranger from the cafe hadn't been a hallucination. There were others who saw. His explanation in the quiet Hofch was a torrent of horrifying, yet strangely validating, information. Weavers from outside conventional reality. Thin places in the fabric of existence. Utrecht as an anchor point for a new, alien resonance. My repeating Thursdays as a side effect of a vast, tuning process. It was the stuff of madmen's diaries, yet it fit every bizarre, unsettling detail I had experienced. His confirmation that my awareness was an anomaly, that my dreams of Friday suggested a strong tether to the old pattern, gave me a perverse sense of pride. I wasn't just a victim, I was a resistor, however inadvertently. The tuning fork, I'd asked him, fascinated by the small, seemingly simple instrument that had dispersed the entity. How does it work? Their reality, their influence, is based on resonance, on maintaining a specific vibrational frequency, Thomas explained, his voice low and urgent in the quiet Hofch. The fork, when struck, produces a pure, concentrated tone that is highly disruptive to their particular wavelength. Think of it like throwing a rock into a perfectly still pond. It shatters their pattern, forces them to retract, to regroup. It's temporary, mind you. They can re-establish their frequency. But it buys time. It creates space. He'd also warned me about the Widwatersteig. They'll reinforce it. Places like that are crucial to their efforts. It's like an open wound through which they bleed into our world. Going back there without understanding the risks, you were lucky, Leone. His departure left me with a terrifying clarity and an even heavier burden. I was known to them now. I was a recognized dissonance. The blank chalkboard was the first, chilling confirmation of that. It wasn't just resetting anymore. It was being actively managed, perhaps even used to send me messages. The game had indeed changed. The quiet contagion was no longer content to be merely insidious, it was becoming responsive, reactive to my awareness. The feeling of being watched, not by human eyes, but by something vast and indifferent, was a constant, cold pressure at the back of my mind. Approximate, 1,400 new words in Phase 3. Total for Phase 3 minus 6,050. Overall story minus 18,200. Okay, this adds good depth. Now for the final push in Phase 4. The confrontation with the collaborator and the aftermath, aiming for about 1,800 to 2,000 more words to hit the 20K target. Expanding Phase 4, targeting an additional 1,800 to 2,000 words for this phase. The appearance of the collaborator, the first stranger, in the cafe was a masterstroke of psychological warfare by the Weavers. After the raw, elemental terror of the entity in the alley and the clandestine meeting with Thomas, this man, human, articulate, sipping tea, was somehow more dreadful. He represented not an alien invasion, but a human surrender, a willing participation in the erasure of our world. His chilling pronouncements about harmony and a perfect Thursday were delivered with the serene confidence of a zealot. "You speak of peace," I'd said to him, my voice trembling despite my efforts to keep it steady, "but it's the peace of the grave. A world without change, without surprise, without real feeling. That's not living." He'd smiled, that slow, knowing smile that didn't touch his cold eyes. "Ah, but real feeling is so often messy, isn't it? Painful. Confusing. The Weavers offer clarity. Simplicity. An end to the anxieties of choice and consequence. Many find that an attractive proposition, once they adjust." He'd leaned forward slightly. "Think of the relief, Leone. No more struggling to remember what's real, no more fighting a battle you cannot win. Just acceptance. A gentle current carrying you through a perfect, unchanging day." His words were like a drug, trying to lull my exhausted mind. The constant vigilance, the fear, the isolation, he was offering an escape from it all. But the price was myself. "And the old guilders?" I'd asked, gesturing towards the coins he'd left. A little theatrical flourish. A reminder that all things pass, even currency, even worlds. A reminder that value is subjective, he'd replied smoothly, pausing at the door. "And that what is old can be made new, or rather, timeless. The Weavers are not destroying, they are perfecting. Curating. And soon, this little exhibit will be flawless." His departure left a void in the cafe, a silence deeper than any I had experienced before. Bram's subsequent obliviousness, his cheerful comment about me seeing a ghost, was almost a comfort, a return to the familiar pattern of denial. But I knew this was different. The collaborator's visit wasn't meant to be erased from my memory. It was a direct communication, a final warning, or perhaps, an invitation. The following Thursdays, for they continued, each one a fresh insult to the concept of linear time, were a masterclass in subtle psychological attrition. The overt anomalies, the ones that had first alerted me, faded. Mynheer Bakker's accents vanished, he was just Mynheer Bakker, polite, predictable, his conversation never straying beyond the weather or the headlines of his, always current, always Thursday, newspaper. Mevrouw de Vries settled on a usual, a latte, not too hot, and never deviated. The world settled into a state of unnerving, placid consistency. It was, in its own way, far more terrifying. The previous chaos had been a sign of the struggle, of the system glitching. This new smoothness felt like the glitch being patched, the program running as intended. The hum, the pervasive frequency, was still there, but it was softer now, more deeply embedded in the ambient soundscape, like a subliminal message woven into the music of the city. It was harder to isolate, harder to fight. It encouraged compliance, discouraged questioning. My resistance became a more desperate, internal affair. I reread my journal obsessively, clinging to the documented evidence of the earlier, more chaotic Thursdays, to Thomas's words, to the entity in the alley. These memories were my lifeline, proof that my current perception of a too perfect Thursday wasn't paranoia but a recognition of the new, more insidious phase of the contagion. I would deliberately try to recall specific details from a previous Thursday, a particular news story, a song Bram had been humming, and then try to verify it in the current iteration. Sometimes there were tiny discrepancies, almost imperceptible shifts in detail, enough to reassure me that the loop wasn't yet seamless, that my memory wasn't entirely compromised. These were my small, secret victories. I thought often of Thomas. Where was he? Was he still fighting? Had he found other dissonances? His parting words, some connections, once made, resonate, were a small, flickering hope. I tried sometimes, in moments of quiet desperation, to project a thought to him, a call for help or solidarity, but there was never any response beyond the persistent, gentle hum of the weaver's encroaching harmony. The collaborator's threat, "You will either find your place in the chorus, or you will be silenced," echoed constantly. What would silencing entail? Would I simply wake up one morning fully tuned, my memories of resistance wiped clean, a contented citizen of the eternal Thursday? Or would it be something more final? The uncertainty was a constant, low-grade torture. My final visit to the Widwatersteed, months or perhaps years into this timeless existence, the duration itself had become meaningless, a blur of identical days, was not a planned act of defiance, but an almost unconscious drift. I found myself standing before its shadowed entrance, drawn by an invisible current. Inside, the atmosphere was different again. The overt menace was gone, replaced by a profound, almost sacred stillness. The hum was a palpable presence here, the very air vibrating with it. It felt like stepping into the heart of a vast, complex machine, or the nave of an alien cathedral. When I touched the wall, the brief, overwhelming connection to the weaver's consciousness was not terrifying in the way the entity had been. It was seductive. A glimpse of an immense, ordered, passionless existence. A cosmic peace. The urge to surrender, to merge, to finally rest, was overpowering. I understood, in that moment, how easily one could choose this. How tempting it would be to simply let go of the struggle, the pain of being different, the exhausting effort of holding on to a reality that was slipping away. It was the image of the collaborator's cold, knowing smile that saved me. His smug certainty that I would eventually break. And the faint, almost forgotten echo of Thomas's belief in the power of dissonance. My whispered "no" in the alley was less an act of heroism and more a stubborn, almost petulant refusal to give my tormentors the satisfaction. Walking out of the Widwatersteed that final time, I knew something had irrevocably shifted within me. The acute terror had faded, replaced by a weary, resolute acceptance of my role. I was a ghost in their machine, a flaw in their perfect design. I couldn't stop the loom, perhaps, but I could refuse to become another one of its identical threads. The Dom Tower's bells, with their new, subtly altered harmonics, were a constant reminder of the ongoing tuning. Each chime was a small death knell for the Utrecht I remembered, the world I had lost. Yet, within that sound, I also heard my own quiet counter-melody, the faint, persistent note of my own awareness. My life in the eternal Thursday became a strange dance of surface compliance and internal rebellion. I served the coffee, smiled at the customers, engaged in the placid, repetitive conversations. But beneath the surface, I observed. I remembered. I wrote. My journal was now a multi-volume epic of a secret war fought with memory and perception. I never saw Thomas again. I never saw Elodie. The collaborator, too, vanished, his purpose presumably served. Perhaps he was enjoying his perfect Thursday somewhere, a contented connoisseur of a well-managed apocalypse. I don't know how it ends. Or if it ends. I live in Thursday, October 12th, forever. The quiet contagion has won, in a way. It has remade the world in its image. But it hasn't fully remade me. Sometimes, late at night, when the hum of the city is at its softest, I take out my watercolors. I try to paint the Utrecht I remember, the vibrant, chaotic, imperfect city of 1,000 fleeting moments. My paintings are flawed, tinged with the melancholy of loss, but they are mine. They are a testament to a reality that once was, a reality I refuse to let die completely. I am Leonie. I am a dissonance. And in the heart of the perfect Thursday, I remember Friday. And that, perhaps, is a victory of its own. Approximate 1950 words in this final expansion. Total word count around minus 20,150. This feels like a complete narrative arc now, hitting the key points and the desired tone and length. The ending is unsettling and resonant, true to the creeping dread, hashtag a perfect Thursday. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The scent of de oude lantern was my morning anchor, a blend of dark roast, warm yeast from Bram's early baking, the faint lemony tang of the polish I used on the wooden tables, and underlying it all, the old, comforting smell of Utrecht itself, damp stone, canal water, and centuries of human habitation. I loved that smell. It meant routine, purpose, a place in the world. My own small apartment, a third-floor walk-up overlooking a quiet, tree-lined gracht, was my sanctuary. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Filled with second-hand books, thriving houseplants I talked to probably more than I should, and a perpetually messy art corner where I dabbled with watercolors, mostly painting scenes of Utrecht that never quite captured the light I saw in my head. I was, by nature, an observer, someone who noticed the tiny details, the way a pigeon strutted with a missing toe, the intricate patterns of lichen on an old brick wall, the exact shade of despair in a tourist's eyes when they realized they'd mistaken the train to Amsterdam. This tendency towards minutiae served me well as a barista, remembering regulars' quirks, anticipating their orders, but sometimes, I knew, it made me prone to overthinking. My mother used to say I could find a conspiracy in a dropped teacup. Bram was my foil in many ways. Where I was introspective and sometimes prone to melancholy, he was relentlessly optimistic, his energy infectious. We'd worked together for 3 years, a comfortable partnership built on shared coffee addictions and an unspoken agreement not to discuss politics before 9 a.m. He was the heart of the cafe's warmth, his booming laugh and genuine interest in people's lives drawing customers in as much as his famous appeltart. That first Thursday, the one that now felt like a faded photograph from a forgotten lifetime, had started like any other. I'd meticulously arranged the display of coffee koken, almond paste-filled, sugar-dusted pastries, their sweetness a perfect counterpoint to the bitter coffee. I'd even managed to get the foam on my practice latte to form a passable, if slightly lopsided, heart. Small victories. The bell above the door of de oude lantern chimed its familiar cheerful tune. 7:02 a.m. I unhooked my helmet, the cool Utrecht air still clinging to my cheeks from the cycle ride along the Oudgracht. Good morgen, Leonie. Bram poked his head out from the small kitchen, flour dusting his dark curls. Coffee machines warming up. Did you bring the sunshine with you? Tried my best, Bram, I laughed, stowing my bag beneath the counter. Looks like it might actually stick around today. The routine was a well-worn groove. First, the chalkboard. Yesterday, I'd meticulously written out that a special brew, a single-origin Ethiopian yirgacheffe, notes of jasmine and citrus. I'd even drawn a little steaming cup next to it. I picked up the chalk, ready to add the tart van de dag. But my hand paused. The board read, Special Brew, Colombian Supremo, rich and nutty. My yirgacheffe, my drawing, gone. Bram, I called, a faint irritation pricking me. Did you change the chalkboard back last night? He emerged, wiping his hands. Change it back. To what? I haven't touched it since you did your fancy lettering yesterday. He squinted at the board. Ha. Supremo. Thought we were on to the Ethiopian. We are, I said. I wrote it up. Clearly. Bram shrugged. Maybe the evening cleaner wiped it by mistake and then tried to remember what was there before. Or you were half asleep and wrote the old one down without thinking. I wasn't half asleep, I muttered, but I took the wet cloth and wiped the Supremo away, carefully rewriting Ethiopian Yirgacheffe. When Bram denied changing it, I'd mentally run through other possibilities. Had I been that tired? Had I perhaps dreamt of writing about the Yirgacheffe, and confused dream with reality? It was plausible. I'd been sleeping poorly, a low-grade anxiety about an upcoming rent review buzzing beneath the surface of my days. Probably just me, I'd conceded to Bram. It didn't really matter. The first regular was Meneer Bakker, at precisely 7:30 a.m., newspaper under his arm. Zwart coffee, alsjeblieft. Strong. Good morgen, Meneer Bakker, I chirped. Guten Morgen, Fräulein, he replied, his voice carrying a distinct, if slight, German lilt. I paused. German. Meneer Bakker was as Dutch as stroopwafels. Maybe he was practicing for a trip. When I'd handed him his coffee, I'd ventured, planning a trip to Germany, Meneer Bakker. He'd looked up. Germany? No, my dear. Why do you ask? His Dutch was impeccable. I'd felt a blush creep up my neck. Oh, no reason. Coincidence. My ears playing tricks. Next came Mevrouw de Vries, 8:15 a.m. Leonie, my love. The usual. Of course, Mevrouw de Vries, I said, turning for her standard cappuccino. Oh, no, dear, she said. Not a cappuccino morning. I fancy an Earl Grey today. Lots of milk. I blinked. Her usual had been a cappuccino for 3 years. An Earl Grey. She beamed. Yes, that's my usual, isn't it? Perfect for a Thursday. Always, I was sure it wasn't. But memory is a slippery thing. These were the small things, the easily dismissible tremors. Anya, the student, who always ordered oat milk, today asked for regular, then looked confused when I double-checked. A delivery driver who usually whistled pop, today hummed classical. Each instance, taken alone, was nothing. My brain, eager for patterns, was perhaps stringing together unrelated coincidences. I told myself I was being fanciful. The end of that first Thursday had Bram making his, "Thank goodness it's almost Friday," comment. When I corrected him, he'd laughed it off easily. Wishful thinking, Leo. My brain's already on weekend mode. And I'd laughed with him. Nothing strange there. The only truly odd thing was the persistent, faint feeling that I'd had that exact exchange before. Déjà vu. Everyone gets that. The chime of the alarm dragged me from a dream of a bright, sunny Friday. 6:30 a.m. I blinked. Thursday. Again. My phone screen confirmed it, Thursday, October 12th. The same date as yesterday. My first reaction wasn't panic, but irritation. Stupid phone, I'd muttered. I restarted it. The date remained. I checked my laptop. Thursday, October 12th. A bizarre network glitch, surely. My cycle to de Oude Lantaarn felt different. The bell above the door chimed. 7:02 a.m. Good morgen, Leonie. Bram, from the kitchen. Coffee machine's warming up. Did you bring the sunshine with you? The exact same words. I stared at him. You said that yesterday. He looked puzzled. Said what? About the sunshine? Well, it's a bit of a gray start, isn't it? My gaze snapped to the chalkboard. Special brew, Colombian Supremo, rich and nutty. My blood ran cold. Even then, I tried to rationalize. Bram was a creature of habit, maybe he used that greeting often. And the chalkboard, maybe he'd changed it back after I left, forgetting to tell me. A stretch, but still possible. Meneer Bakker arrived. More, menskind, he replied, his Afrikaans accent unmistakable. Yesterday it was German. Mevrouw de Vries. Leonie, my angel. The usual, if you please. And don't forget that extra dash of cinnamon. Her usual was a cappuccino. Never with cinnamon. The changing accents, the wildly fluctuating usuals, these were the moments the rationalizations began to crumble. When Mr. Bakker spoke Afrikaans, I actually asked him, "Have you been to South Africa recently, Meneer Bakker?" He looked at me as if I'd grown a second head. South Africa, child. Good heavens, no. Not for 50 years. Whatever gave you that idea? Then he'd seamlessly continued his order in perfect Dutch. I felt small, foolish. Each denial, each placid dismissal from the people around me, chipped away at my confidence in my own perceptions. They weren't just disagreeing, they were looking at me with a kind of gentle pity. And the more they did that, the more I began to wonder if they were right. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The third Thursday, or the third iteration of the same Thursday, was when the dull unease solidified into a cold, hard knot of dread. My meticulous nature now felt like a curse, forcing me to see the cracks in a reality everyone else perceived as smooth and whole. My journal transformed into a logbook of the impossible. I started noting down not just the glaring anomalies, but the minutiae surrounding them, the exact time on my phone, always Thursday, always progressing normally, within the 24-hour cycle before resetting, the weather, which did vary slightly, one Thursday drizzly, another sunny, proving it wasn't an identical carbon copy, even the headlines on Meneer Bakker's newspapers, which also seemed to update, reflecting a world that was moving on. Even if my immediate environment wasn't. It was my little bubble, my Utrecht, or perhaps just my cafe, caught in this temporal stutter. The Friday the 13th comment from the customer with the laptop became a focal point. The next Thursday, I asked her the date. She smiled brightly. Of course. It's Thursday the 12th. No mention of Friday the 13th. Had I misheard her? Or was her reality as pliable as everyone else's? I surreptitiously glanced at other customers' phones. Most showed Thursday 12th. But one, belonging to a businessman, clearly displayed Friday 12th, an impossible date combination. He didn't seem to notice. The inconsistency was maddening. My attempts to communicate my distress to Bram became more pointed. "Bram," I said one Thursday, "Meneer Bakker just ordered in fluent German. Yesterday it was Afrikaans. Don't you find that odd?" Bram paused. "Leonie, what are you talking about? Meneer Bakker always speaks Dutch. Are you feeling all right? You've been very on edge lately." He then added, with a forced chuckle, "Too much strong coffee, perhaps." His denial was so absolute it felt like a physical blow. It wasn't just that he didn't remember, it was that my reality was actively, demonstrably false to him. I tried to capture evidence. One Thursday, I propped my phone up to film the chalkboard after I'd written the Yurgachev special. The footage later showed me writing, the Colombian Supremo. My own hand, forming the words I was trying to disprove. The loop wasn't just resetting the physical world, it was retroactively editing any attempt to document its inconsistencies. The dreams of Friday became more elaborate, more cruelly tantalizing. In one, I had a long, heartfelt conversation with my sister on the phone, making plans to visit her. I woke up with the phantom sensation of the phone against my ear, tears streaming down my face, the Thursday date on my phone a brutal negation of that connection, that future. One afternoon, during a lull, the bell chimed. A man stepped in, tall, dressed in unassuming dark clothes, his eyes a very pale, watchful gray. He approached the counter. "Just a glass of water, please," he said, his voice quiet, English with an unplaceable accent. As I gave it to him, he said, "You notice things, don't you? The echoes. The little skips in the record." My heart leaped. Some Thursdays are just sticky. Prone to getting caught in the works. What works? I breathed. "Best not to pull too hard on a stuck thread," he said. "It can unravel more than you intend. Don't ask too many questions. Don't try to fix it. Just ride it out." He placed the empty glass precisely on a coaster and left. Bram came out. "Who was that?" "Just a customer," I said. Bram hadn't seen him, or wouldn't remember. But the stranger's words were branded onto my consciousness. The subtle environmental warping began after his visit. The flickering fluorescent light above the pastry case pulsed in a slow rhythm, short long, then later, long short long. Was it a code? I'd try to time the flickers, write down the patterns, but they were inconsistent, shifting. One afternoon, I was staring at a small Vermeer print near the toilets. I was sure, the previous Thursday, the woman in it had faced left. Today, she faced right. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up. I was being gaslit by Vermeer. My online research became a desperate hunt. I typed in localized time loop, collective memory fabrication, Utrecht anomaly, perceptual contagions. Most results were fiction or conspiracy theories too loud for the subtle horror I was experiencing. The true horror was in its quietness, its reasonableness to everyone but me. One evening, I wept. Not for the lost Fridays, but for my lost self, the Leonie who had trusted her own mind. That Leonie was fading, replaced by a paranoid, exhausted stranger. What if, eventually, I stopped noticing? What if I, too, began to greet each morning with a placid smile, oblivious to the beautiful, terrible trap? Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The discovery of De Echo Dagen, in a dusty book, Utrecht's Eigenaardigheden en Vergtenzaken, was a flickering candle. It spoke of thin locations where days might stutter, and of a loosening of one's temporal anchor. It mentioned the Witwatersrand dash, an alley where time might sometimes snag on a crooked nail. It became my obsessive focus. Before daring to visit, I tried to find Elodie again, the student who'd whispered about the frequency and tuning. One Thursday, she was there. "Elodie," I said softly. "Do you remember talking to me about the city's hum?" She frowned, then her eyes smoothed into blank politeness. "The hum? I don't think so. Was it about the construction noise?" The window of connection was shut. The hum Elodie had mentioned, I became acutely aware of it. It felt structural, as if the very bones of the city were vibrating at an unnatural frequency. Some Thursdays it was a thrum, on others, a distinct pressure in my sinuses, a subtle disorientation. Was this the tuning mechanism? My first visit to the Witwatersrand confirmed its wrongness: oppressive silence, a wilted tulip where fresh ones were sold, a shimmer in the air, an indecipherable whispering from the walls. A mental image of a chalkboard screaming, "GAWEG," became a clear deterrent, but also a confirmation: something was here. My second visit was born of desperation. The alley felt actively hostile. The graffiti writhed, impossible knots pulsing. My phone died. A swirling gray mist appeared at the alley's end, and from it, a shadowy, featureless entity coalesced. Its mental communication was violating: "You are a dissonance. You resist the harmony." The pattern must hold, it offered to correct me, to harmonize me. For a moment, peace, an end to the struggle, sounded tempting. The hum in my bones urged me to surrender. It was the memory of tiny, specific beauties, the exact blue of a Delft tile, the bitter perfection of an espresso, sunlight fracturing through leaves on a real, spring morning, that anchored me. No, I said, a small, desperate act of self-preservation. The entity seemed to build pressure, to squeeze the resistance out of me. Just as I felt my consciousness fraying, a sharp, urgent voice cut through. Leonie. Get out of there. Now. It was the stranger from the cafe, Thomas, standing at the alley entrance, holding a tuning fork. He struck it. A clear, high-pitched tone rang out. The entity recoiled, its form flickering, a silent psychic shriek of interference. Thomas struck the fork again. Run, Leonie. He pulled me out. The entity dissolved into the collapsing vortex. In a hidden hofje, Thomas explained. Weavers, from outside conventional reality, thin places, Utrecht as an anchor for their new resonance. My repeating Thursdays, a side effect of their tuning process. The tuning fork? I asked. Certain frequencies disrupt their cohesion, Thomas said. It shatters their pattern, temporarily. He warned me the Widwatersteeg would be reinforced. My awareness made me a problem for them. His departure left me with terrifying clarity. I was known. The blank chalkboard in the cafe later was a chilling message. The game had changed. The quiet contagion was now responsive. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The appearance of the collaborator, the first stranger, in the cafe was a masterstroke. Human, articulate, sipping tea, he was somehow more dreadful. A connoisseur, he called himself, an admirer of elegant patterns. This is their most elegant work yet. A self-repairing, self-perfecting moment. A Thursday distilled to its purest essence, forever. It's a nightmare, I said. Perspective, my dear. For a frayed reality, it is a soothing balm. His words were insidious. Most will adapt. Free from the burden of unpredictable futures and messy, contradictory pasts. Don't you ever wish for such peace? The only thing right is the truth, I countered. Truth is merely the dominant signal, he replied. And the signal is changing. The hum swelled, pressing in. Thomas, only delays the inevitable. The tide is rising, Leonie. And even the strongest swimmers eventually tire. He left old guilders on the table. Enjoy your Thursdays. His warning, you will either find your place in the chorus, or you will be silenced. The following Thursdays were a masterclass in subtle psychological attrition. Overt anomalies lessened. The world settled into unnerving, placid consistency. The hum was softer, more deeply embedded. It encouraged compliance. My resistance became a desperate, internal affair. I reread my journal obsessively. I'd try to recall specific details from a previous Thursday, a news story, a song Bram hummed, and then try to verify it. Sometimes there were tiny discrepancies, enough to reassure me my memory wasn't entirely compromised. My final visit to the Widwatersteeg, months or perhaps years later, was an unconscious drift. The overt menace was gone, replaced by a profound, sacred stillness. The hum was a palpable presence. When I touched the wall, the brief, overwhelming connection to the weaver's consciousness was seductive. A glimpse of an immense, ordered, passionless existence. The urge to surrender, to finally rest, was overpowering. It was the image of the collaborator's cold smile that saved me. My whispered no was a stubborn refusal to give them the satisfaction. Walking out, I knew something had irrevocably shifted. The acute terror had faded, replaced by a weary, resolute acceptance of my role. I was a ghost in their machine. The Dom Tower's bells, with their new, subtly altered harmonics, were a constant reminder of the ongoing tuning. My life in the eternal Thursday became a dance of surface compliance and internal rebellion. I served coffee, smiled, engaged in placid conversations. But beneath, I observed. Remembered. Wrote. My journal became a multi-volume epic of a secret war. I never saw Thomas again. Or Elodie. The collaborator vanished. I don't know how it ends. Or if it ends. I live in Thursday, October 12th, forever. The quiet contagion has won, in a way. It has remade the world. But it hasn't fully remade me. Sometimes, late at night, I take out my watercolors. I try to paint the Utrecht I remember, the vibrant, chaotic, imperfect city. My paintings are flawed, tinged with loss, but they are mine. A testament to a reality that once was. I am Leonie. I am a dissonance. And in the heart of the perfect Thursday, I remember Friday. And that, perhaps, is a victory of its own, the turn of the key. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My flat, 2B, third floor of a sandstone tenement in Partick, has always been my sanctuary. Not grand, by any means, a kitchen barely big enough for the small table I eat at, a living room dominated by bookshelves and a view of the communal green, mostly gray, this time of year, a bedroom that just fits a double bed and a wardrobe, and a bathroom where the shower pressure is a daily gamble. But it's mine. For 6 years, it's been the quiet backdrop to my meticulously ordered life as Nadia Anwar, legal assistant, lover of routine, and connoisseur of solitude. The work is precise, demanding. I draft documents, manage case files, schedule stern-faced barristers. Details matter. A misplaced comma can alter meaning, a forgotten deadline can derail a case. I bring that precision home. My keys always go in the ceramic bowl by the door. My coat is hung, not thrown. The remote control lives squarely on the second shelf of the coffee table. This isn't obsession, I tell myself, just efficiency. It's how I keep the chaos of the world, the relentless demands of the firm, at bay. The first time I heard it, I barely registered it. A faint, rhythmic click-click, pause, click from above. Mrs. Henderson, flat 3B. 80-something, lived here longer than the stones themselves, probably. I'd helped her with her overflowing recycling bins just last week, her hands gnarled with arthritis, her eyes watery but kind. New lock, dear? I'd asked, making conversation. She just smiled vaguely. Keeping things secure, you know. So, the clicking. Probably just her, fumbling with a stiff new mechanism. Or perhaps she was a little forgetful, checking it a few times before settling. It was late October in Glasgow, the nights were drawing in with a vengeance, the wind skirling down the River Clyde and rattling the sash windows. A bit of extra caution from an elderly lady living alone. Understandable. I turned up the volume on the podcast I was listening to, a dry discussion on Scottish property law, and thought no more of it. But the sound persisted. Night after night. Not a frantic fumbling, but a measured, almost ritualistic cadence. Click click. The tumblers engaging, I imagined, pause. A breath held, click. The bolts sliding home. Sometimes it would go on for 10, 15 minutes. Sometimes, on particularly quiet nights when the usual city hum seemed muted, I could swear it stretched closer to an hour. It became a new, unwelcome layer in the soundscape of my evenings, like a dripping tap you can't quite ignore once you've noticed it. I mentioned it to my colleague, Sarah, during a lunch break, mostly to fill the silence. The old lady upstairs from me, I said, stirring my soup, she locks and unlocks her door. Constantly. It's a bit odd. Sarah shrugged, scrolling through her phone. Maybe she's got early onset something. Or just nervous. Old people, eh? And that was that. Dismissed. I felt a small prickle of irritation, not at Sarah, but at the unresolved nature of it. It was a loose thread in the otherwise neat tapestry of my building. Then, about a week later, I heard it from across the landing. Mr. Baird, 2A. A man so quiet I sometimes forgot he existed, save for the scent of pipe tobacco that occasionally drifted under his door. His clicks were softer, less emphatic than Mrs. Henderson's, but the rhythm was identical. Click click, pause, click. Now, this was stranger. Mr. Baird was maybe 60, hale and hearty enough from the glimpses I caught of him heading out for his morning paper. Not the type for nervous fussing, I wouldn't have thought. Two of them. On the same floor. I started listening for it deliberately. My flat, usually a haven of quiet focus for my evening reading or prep for the next day's work, became an observation post. I'd sit in my worn armchair, book unread in my lap, head tilted, straining to differentiate the sounds. Mrs. Henderson, upstairs, click click, pause, click. Mr. Baird, across, click click, pause, click. It was Liam from 1C, the ground floor flat, that tipped me from vaguely unsettled into genuinely perplexed. Liam was a student, prone to late nights and the occasional thumping bassline that vibrated up through my floorboards. One Tuesday, as I was making tea around 9, his usual noise was absent. Instead, fainter but unmistakable, came the sound from below. Click click, pause, click. Liam. The epitome of youthful nonchalance, now engaging in this meticulous door ceremony. I began to make excuses for it. Maybe there'd been a spate of break-ins reported in the local Partick newsletter that I'd missed. A new security fad sweeping the neighborhood. Perhaps they'd all invested in the same brand of high-security lock that required this specific sequence to engage properly, though that seemed unlikely. I even Googled compulsive door locking Glasgow, which yielded results about OCD, but nothing about a shared, rhythmic, multi-person phenomenon. The explanations felt thin, unraveling as soon as I formed them. The sound was insidious. It wasn't loud enough to be a proper noise complaint, not like Liam's music. It was too personal, too tied to the act of securing one's own home, to feel like something I could legitimately object to. Yet, it burrowed under my skin. The repetition, the shared, unacknowledged peculiarity of it. My carefully curated piece was being eroded, click by painstaking click. One Thursday evening, I decided to count. I turned off the radio, silenced my phone, and just listened. Mrs. Henderson started first, around 7:05 p.m. Her familiar cadence from above. At 7:12 p.m., Mr. Baird joined in. Then, around 7:20 p.m., Liam. But then, another one. Fainter, seeming to come from further down the close, or perhaps the adjacent building, the sound traveling oddly through the thick stone walls. Click click, pause, click. And another. This one felt like it was on my level, but not Mr. Baird. Flat 2C. The young couple who argued a lot. Or 2D, the quiet woman I rarely saw. And then another, from upstairs again, but not directly above. Mrs. Henderson was in 3B. This sounded like 3A or 3C. My heart began to thrum a little faster. I grabbed a notepad and pen, the lawyer in me needing to document. I started to make tick marks for each distinct source I could identify. It was difficult, sometimes the sounds overlapped, a small, unsettling symphony of security. After an hour of intense listening, my neck stiff, my ears ringing with the phantom sensation of clicks even when there was a lull, I looked at my notepad. I had 17 distinct tick marks. 17. I lived on the third floor of a 4-story tenement. Each floor, including the ground floor, had 4 flats. That meant 16 flats in the entire building. 16 front doors, if you didn't count the main close door. But I was on the 3rd floor. From my position, I could reasonably hear my own floor, 4 flats, including mine, the floor above, 4 flats, and the floor below, 4 flats. That was 12 flats, including my own. If every single one of them was doing it, that would be 11 other sources. Yet I'd counted 17. It wasn't possible. Unless the sound was carrying from other buildings in a way I'd never noticed before. From across the street. But it felt closer, more intimate, like it was woven into the very fabric of my tenement. Or perhaps some people had multiple locks they were ritualistically engaging. A front door, then a porch door, then another internal door. Unlikely to this extent, and with that specific, shared rhythm. I stood up, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I walked to my own front door. It was a solid, dark wood door, probably original to the building. I'd replaced the old Yale lock with a modern, 5-lever mortise deadlock when I moved in. One firm turn of the key. Click. Secure. That was all it needed. I put my ear to the wood. Muffled, but undeniably there, Mr. Baird's clicks from 2A. Fainter, Mrs. Henderson's from 3B. And others, a complex, layered tapping that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the hallway itself. 17. My building only had 12 flats accessible from my landing sound range. If you counted the entire building, 16 flats. Where were the other sounds coming from? The thought, absurd and unwelcome, flickered, are there more doors now? I shook my head, a little too forcefully. Stress. I was definitely stressed. Work had been intense. I was probably overtired, my senses playing tricks on me. That had to be it. I was letting the mundane anxieties of city living, the quirky habits of neighbors, get to me. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, double-checking that my own door was securely locked, just once, a firm, definite click, and went to bed, determined to ignore the unsettling chorus that now seemed to be the building's nightly prayer. But the next evening, it was there again. And the night after. I stopped counting. The number itself felt less important than the sheer, oppressive fact of the sound. It was like a quiet contagion, spreading from door to door, a shared secret I wasn't privy to. My flat, once my sanctuary, now felt like a besieged outpost, the enemy not at the gates, but meticulously, patiently, locking them. I started to notice other small things, or perhaps I was just looking for them, my mind primed for the peculiar. The light in the close flickered more than usual, not just the occasional buzz of a dying bulb, but in odd, almost syncopated patterns that seemed to coincide with lulls in the locking. Sometimes, walking down the stairs, I'd catch a scent, not unpleasant, just unidentifiable, like damp wool and something metallic, almost ozonic, that hadn't been there before. It would vanish as quickly as it came. My own routines became a bulwark against the creeping strangeness. I clung to them. Keys in the bowl. Coat on the hook. Precise, deliberate actions. But even these small comforts were tainted by the awareness of the sounds from beyond my door. I started to dread the evenings, the time when the clicking would inevitably begin. My sleep suffered. I'd wake in the small hours, my heart pounding, thinking I'd heard a new click, closer this time. I had to know. I couldn't just live with this auditory haunting. One Saturday afternoon, when the sounds were usually absent, it seemed to be primarily an evening ritual, I saw Mrs. Henderson slowly making her way up the stairs, a tartan shopping trolley bumping behind her. This was my chance. Mrs. Henderson, I said, my voice brighter than I felt. Can I give you a hand with that? She paused, looking up at me, her eyes clouded but with a flicker of recognition. Oh, Nadia dear. That's kind of you. I helped her with the trolley up the last few steps to her landing. Her door, 3B, looked the same as always. Solid, a little battered around the edges. Settling in all right with that new lock? I asked, trying for casual. She fumbled in her purse for her keys, her hand trembling slightly. Oh, yes, dear. Very secure. I've noticed you, you seem to check it quite a bit in the evenings, I ventured, feeling like a spy. She stopped fumbling and looked directly at me. Her gaze was surprisingly lucid, and unnervingly placid. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. It's safer this way, dear, she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. She finally found her key and inserted it into the lock. Click click, she turned it, then paused, then turned it again. Click. You'll understand soon. Then, without another word, she opened her door and disappeared inside, leaving me standing on the landing, the echo of her words hanging in the stale air of the close. You'll understand soon. It wasn't a reassurance. It felt like a pronouncement. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. A chill snaked down my spine, colder than the Glasgow damp that seeped through the tenement walls. You'll understand soon. It wasn't the words themselves, so much as the calm, almost pitying certainty in Mrs. Henderson's voice. As if she were privy to a fundamental truth about existence that I, in my ignorance, was still fumbling towards. Her pronouncement became a refrain in my head, overlaying the relentless click-click, pause, click that now seemed to start earlier each evening and last longer into the night. I tried to dismiss it. She was an old woman. Perhaps a touch senile. Perhaps she was part of some strange neighborhood watch initiative that involved elaborate locking rituals. But her eyes had been clear. The following week, I cornered Mr. Baird as he was collecting a package from a courier at the main close door. He was a man of few words at the best of times, usually offering a curt nod if our paths crossed. "Mr. Baird," I began, my voice carefully neutral, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but I've heard a lot of, door locking in the evenings. On our floor. Is everything all right?" He turned his gaze on me, his expression unreadable. He was holding a small, brown cardboard box. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, almost a perfect echo of Mrs. Henderson, he said, "It's how things are done. For safety." He paused, then added, his voice flat, "You do well to ensure your own is properly secured." "Properly secured?" I repeated. "I have a 5-lever deadlock." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "You'll see." And then he was gone, ascending the stairs, the parcel tucked under his arm. "You'll understand soon. You'll see." The sense of isolation began to crystallize. It wasn't just that my neighbors were behaving oddly, it was that they seemed to share a silent, knowing consensus from which I was excluded. When I tried to bridge that gap, to seek a rational explanation, I was met with these gentle, almost regretful dismissals, as if I were a child asking questions whose answers were too complex or too troubling for me to comprehend. My attempts to discuss it with Sarah at work grew strained. "Still on about the door locking thing, Nadia?" she'd ask, a little too brightly, her eyes flicking away. "Maybe you should take a few days off. You seem a bit wired." I wanted to scream. "It's not me, it's them. It's the building. Something is wrong." But I knew how it would sound. I could hear the perceived hysteria in my own unspoken words. So I'd swallow my frustration and talk about caseloads and deadlines, the conversation a thin veneer over the chasm of my growing unease. The number 17. That damned number of clicks I'd counted. It gnawed at me. Our building, ground, first, second, mine, third. 4 flats per floor. 16 flats total. Where did 17 come from? One Saturday morning, feigning a need for fresh air, I found myself standing outside my own flat, 2B, staring down the hallway of our landing. Flat 2A, Mr. Baird. Opposite me, 2C, the argumentative couple. Next to them, 2D, the quiet woman. 4 doors. As it should be. I walked the length of the landing, from the stairwell at one end to the blank wall at the other. I counted my paces, 12. It felt longer than I remembered. Had it always been 12 paces? My memory was usually sharp for details like this, a byproduct of my job. I shook my head. I was becoming obsessed. I was letting this get to me. Then, it happened. It was a Tuesday evening, the rain lashing against my window, the wind howling a mournful dirge. The clicking was in full swing, a percussive accompaniment to the storm. I was trying to read, but the words swam before my eyes. I got up to make tea, and as I passed my front door, I glanced out the peephole. Habit, mostly. The hallway light was flickering erratically. And for a split second, just a heartbeat, I saw it. Between flat 2C and 2D, where there was usually a section of plain, faded wallpaper, there was another door. Dark wood, like the others, with a tarnished brass doorknob. No number. I gasped, recoiling from the peephole, my heart hammering. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, pressing my eye back to the lens. The blank wall was back. Just wallpaper, slightly peeling at the corner. Had I imagined it? A trick of the flickering light, my overtired brain conjuring phantoms. But the image was seared into my mind. The solid, undeniable presence of a fifth door on our landing. My research efforts intensified, moving from general anxiety forums to more esoteric corners of the internet. Local Glasgow history sites, forums on urban legends, architectural anomalies. I found tales of hidden rooms in old tenements, walled-off spaces from previous configurations, but nothing that matched the transient, impossible nature of what I thought I'd seen, nothing about collective, rhythmic door locking. My search terms: Glasgow tenement extra door, hallway changing length, compulsive neighbor sounds, yielded nothing but frustration. I started a journal, a small, black moleskine, documenting the times of the locking, the intensity, any unusual occurrences. The flickering lights. The strange, fleeting smells. My own growing sense of dread. Each entry felt like a message in a bottle, cast into an uncaring sea. One morning, a small, plain brown envelope lay on my doormat. No stamp, no address, just my flat number, 2B, written in neat, spidery handwriting. Inside, nestled on a piece of plain card, was a key. It was old, made of heavy, dark metal, possibly iron. The bow was a simple, unadorned circle, the bit intricately cut with an unusual pattern of wards. It wasn't a modern key. It certainly didn't fit my own front door. I tried it immediately, my hand trembling. The ward pattern was completely different. It didn't fit the lock on my kitchen window, nor the old Victorian trunk I used as a coffee table. It fit nothing. Where had it come from? Who had left it? There was no note, no explanation. I examined the handwriting on the envelope. It wasn't Mrs. Henderson's arthritic scrawl, nor did it seem like Mr. Baird's style, judging by the occasional note I'd seen from him on the communal notice board about bin collections. The key felt significant. Heavy with an unspoken purpose. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I placed it in the ceramic bowl by my door, next to my own keys, where it lay like a dark, silent question. The contagion, as I'd started to think of it, was definitely spreading. I began to hear the click-click, pause, click from other buildings as I walked to work. A faint, rhythmic tapping from a ground-floor flat on Dumbarton Road. A distinct series of clicks from a posh townhouse near Kelvingrove Park. It was no longer confined to my tenement. Or perhaps, I was now attuned to it, cursed to hear this subtle, creeping madness wherever I went. The people I saw exhibiting the behavior, or those I suspected of it, like Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Baird, had a peculiar calmness about them. A placidity that was far more unsettling than any outward sign of distress. They looked at me with a sort of gentle concern, as if I were the one who was unwell, who hadn't yet grasped some essential truth. The secondary mystery, if it could be called that, was the hallway itself. It wasn't just the fleeting vision of the extra door. The landing felt different. Sometimes, walking its length felt like traversing a much greater distance than it should. The quality of the light, even during the day, seemed subtly altered, the shadows deeper, the corners more obscure. I started to measure it with my feet, counting my steps obsessively. Sometimes it was 12 paces from the stairs to the end wall. Sometimes it was 14. Once, memorably, it felt like nearly 20, the far wall receding as I walked towards it, a disconcerting optical illusion that left me breathless and nauseous. I'd blink, shake my head, and it would be 12 paces again. I was losing my grip. Surely, I was. I thought about moving. The thought was a lifeline. Sell the flat, get out of Glasgow, away from these old, stone buildings that seemed to breathe and shift around me. But the practicalities were overwhelming. The cost, the disruption, finding a new job. And a darker thought, what if it wasn't the building? What if it was me? What if I took this perception, this madness, with me? My isolation felt complete. I was a solitary island of frantic rationality in an ocean of quiet, inexplicable behavior. I stopped trying to talk to Sarah about it. I stopped calling my mother as often, afraid my anxieties would bleed into the conversation, bringing me worried platitudes and suggestions of a doctor's visit. The journal became my only confidant, its pages filling with my increasingly desperate observations and fears. The key on the hall table seemed to watch me, its silent presence a constant reminder of the enigma that was consuming my life. One evening, the locking sounds were particularly intense, a veritable chorus from at least a dozen sources. I felt trapped, suffocated by the rhythmic clicks. On impulse, I grabbed my coat and fled the flat, needing to escape, to breathe air that wasn't thick with implied locks and hidden mechanisms. As I hurried down the close, I passed flat 1C. Liam's door. The light under it was off. But as I drew level, I heard it, very clearly. Not from his door. But from the wall beside his door. A section of blank, grimy stonework. Click click, pause, click. My blood ran cold. I didn't stop. I practically ran out into the rain-swept street, the sounds of the city, traffic, distant sirens, the chatter of people leaving pubs, a temporary, blessed relief from the insidious quiet of my building. But even as I walked, a part of me was listening, straining for that familiar, dreadful rhythm in the noises of the wider world. And sometimes, I thought I heard it. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The incident with the sound from the wall beside Liam's door marked a shift. My attempts at rationalization, already flimsy, began to disintegrate entirely. There was no logical explanation for a sound like that emanating from solid stone. My theories about mass hysteria or a shared psychological tic felt inadequate to explain the increasingly physical strangeness of my environment. Was it the building itself? An entity, ancient and incomprehensible, stirring in its stone bones? Or something bleeding through from elsewhere? The questions were monstrous, too large for the confines of my small, ordered life. I started to spend more time researching the history of my tenement building, and the Partick area itself. I trawled online archives of the Mitchell Library, looking for old maps, newspaper articles about strange occurrences, anything. Most of it was mundane, records of ownership, minor repairs, adverts for long-vanished shops. But one small, digitized article from a local paper in 1898 caught my eye. It spoke of unaccountable disappearances from a row of tenements near the river, including the very street where I lived. Residents speak of an unease, it read, of doors that will not stay bolted, and of hallways that seem to shift in the gloaming. The language was archaic, sensationalist, but the parallel sent a shiver down my spine. It was dismissed at the time as local superstition, fueled by poor sanitation and gaslight fumes. But now, the key. The strange, heavy key I'd found. It became an object of intense focus. I'd pick it up, turn it over in my fingers, feeling its cold weight. Sometimes, when the locking sounds from the other flats reached a particular crescendo, I fancied I could feel a faint vibration from it, a sympathetic resonance. Or perhaps it was just the tremor in my own hand. I tried it on every lock I could find, old chests in antique shops, neglected garden gates, even, in a moment of desperation, the keyhole of a public locker at the train station. Nothing. It remained stubbornly inert, its purpose a maddening secret. The pressure to conform, to join the nightly ritual, was immense, though entirely unspoken. When I passed Mrs. Henderson on the stairs, her placid gaze would rest on me, and I felt an almost physical weight of expectation. Mr. Baird's curt nod seemed to carry a hint of, disappointment. It was all in my head, surely. They weren't doing anything to me. But the atmosphere in the building was thick with it, this shared, silent insistence. The very air seemed to hum with the rhythm of the locks. Then came the night I defied it. I don't know what possessed me. Perhaps it was a desperate act of rebellion, a final stand for my own sanity. The chorus of clicks had begun, as usual, just after 7. I'd listened to it for an hour, the sound drilling into my skull. I made a conscious decision, I would not check my own lock. I would not even think about my lock. I would go to bed, my door secured with its single, firm turn from earlier in the day, and I would ignore them. I went through my bedtime routine with exaggerated normalcy. Brushed my teeth. Read a few pages of a thoroughly unengaging novel. Climbed into bed. The sounds from the other flat seemed louder tonight, more insistent, as if they knew. Click click, pause, click. Click click, pause, click. I pulled the duvet over my head, pressed my hands to my ears, and eventually, through sheer exhaustion, fell into a troubled sleep. I woke with a gasp, disoriented and cold. Not in my bed. I was lying on the hard, dusty floor of the landing, outside my own front door. My door. Flat 2B. Closed. And, I knew with a sickening certainty, locked. The hallway was dim, lit by the eerie orange glow of the streetlights filtering through the grimy window at the end of the close. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might break free. How? How had I gotten here? I had no memory of leaving my bed, of walking, of the door closing behind me. Sleepwalking? I'd never sleepwalked in my life. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I scrambled to my feet, my limbs stiff and aching. My keys, where were my keys? I fumbled in the pockets of my pajamas. Empty. Of course. My keys were inside, in the ceramic bowl by the door. Where they always were. I was locked out. In my pajamas. In the dead of night. A low chuckle echoed from behind one of the nearby doors. Or perhaps it was just the wind. Tears pricked my eyes. This wasn't just strange anymore. This was punitive. As if the building itself, or whatever force animated it, was punishing me for my defiance. You'll understand soon. Mrs. Henderson's voice whispered in my memory. Shivering, more from terror than the cold, I banged on my own door. Hello? Is anyone there? A ridiculous question. Of course no one was there. Then I remembered the spare key I kept hidden under a loose floorboard just inside the flat, for emergencies. But that was inside. Useless. Desperate, I thought of my neighbors. Could I knock on Mr. Baird's door? Or the couple in 2C? What would I say? I seemed to have woken up outside my locked flat with no memory of how I got here. Could I possibly use your phone? I would sound unhinged. And what if they just looked at me with that same placid, knowing pity? Then, my gaze fell on it. On the dusty floor, near where I'd woken, glinting faintly in the orange light. The strange key. The one from the envelope. I must have knocked it out of the bowl when whatever had happened, happened. Or had it been placed there? My hand trembled as I picked it up. It felt colder than usual, heavier. On a wild, desperate impulse, I turned to my own door, to flat 2B, and pushed the strange key into the lock. It slid in. Smoothly. Perfectly. My breath caught in my throat. I turned the key. Click click, pause, click. The sound, my own lock, but with that alien, ritualistic cadence. The tumblers engaged, the bolt slid back. The door opened. My flat was dark, silent. Exactly as I'd left it. My keys were in the bowl by the door. I stumbled inside, my legs weak, and leaned back against the closed door, my body shaking uncontrollably. The strange key was still clutched in my hand. It had opened my door. From the outside. A door it hadn't fit before. What did this mean? Was the key changing? Or were the locks? The extra doors started to appear more frequently after that night. Not just fleeting glimpses in my peripheral vision, but more solid, more persistent manifestations. Sometimes, walking down the landing, I would see 5 doors instead of 4. Then, one afternoon, I counted 6. They were always dark wood, featureless, without numbers or peepholes. They looked as if they had always been there, seamlessly integrated into the fabric of the hallway. If I stared at them directly, they would sometimes flicker, the image wavering like heat haze, before resolving back into blank wall. But other times, they remained stubbornly, terrifyingly real. I never saw anyone enter or leave them. The hallway itself continued its subtle warping. The distance to the end wall remained variable, unpredictable. Sometimes, the corners seemed sharper, more acute than they should be. Other times, they seemed to soften, to curve slightly. It was like walking through a space drawn by a drunken architect. The key. It now felt warm to the touch whenever I held it, especially when I was near one of the anomalous doors, or when the locking sounds were particularly intense. It seemed to pulse with a faint, internal energy. I started carrying it with me everywhere, a talisman against a threat I couldn't define. I tried, one last time, to find an ally. A new family, the Alice, had supposedly moved into 4A, the top floor flat that had been empty for months. I saw Mrs. Ollie in the local shop, a young woman with a kind face, struggling with a pushchair and 2 bags of shopping. I helped her, and we chatted. She seemed normal, friendly, refreshingly ordinary. I invited her for coffee, hoping, praying, that she hadn't yet been assimilated. She came to my flat the next afternoon. I steered the conversation carefully, testing the waters. "Have you noticed anything unusual about the building?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She smiled. "It's an old building. Full of drafts. And the stairs are a killer with the wee one." "No, I mean, the sounds." "At night?" A flicker in her eyes. Just a flicker. Then it was gone. "Oh, you mean the locking?" "Yes, we've started doing that too. Mr. Henderson from downstairs was very helpful, explained it all." She paused, then tilted her head, her expression softening into that familiar, gentle pity. "It really is much safer, Nadia. You should try it. You'll feel better." My heart sank. She was one of them. Or becoming one. Later that evening, as the chorus of clicks began, a new rhythm joined in from the top floor. Fainter, but distinct. The Alice. Click click, pause, click. The stakes were no longer just my sanity. The night I woke up outside my flat had proven that. This thing, whatever it was, could interact with me physically. It could move me. It could lock me out. Or, perhaps, lock me in. The key was a mystery, but it felt like a tool, a piece of the puzzle. But what puzzle? And what did it unlock? The neighbor's behavior, while still not overtly aggressive, took on a more watchful quality. When I passed them, their gazes lingered. Their placid smiles seemed tighter. The phrase, "you'll understand soon," echoed in my mind not as a promise, but as an ultimatum. The environmental warping became more pronounced. One morning, I walked out of my flat to find the entire hallway bathed in a sickly green light, the source of which I couldn't identify. It lasted for perhaps 30 seconds, then faded back to the usual dimness. Shadows stretched and writhed in impossible ways, detaching from objects and crawling along the walls. The faint, unidentifiable smell, damp wool and ozone, was now a near-constant presence in the clothes. I knew I was approaching some kind of precipice. The world I had known, the solid, predictable reality I had clung to, was dissolving around me, replaced by this quiet, creeping nightmare. The question was no longer if I would understand, but what understanding would mean. And if I would survive it. The key in my pocket felt like my only potential weapon, or perhaps, the very instrument of my surrender. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The decision came not as a courageous surge, but as a quiet exhaustion. I couldn't live like this anymore, a prisoner in my own home, teetering on the edge of a reality I no longer recognized. The constant dread, the oppressive sounds, the shifting architecture of my own building, it had all worn me down. The strange key, now perpetually warm in my pocket, felt less like a talisman and more like an invitation. An invitation to what, I didn't know, but even the unknown seemed preferable to this slow, relentless erosion of my sanity. It was a Thursday night. The clicking chorus was at its peak, a complex, percussive symphony of tumblers and bolts. I stood in my living room, the key in my hand. It was almost hot now, and I could swear I felt a faint thrumming emanating from it, a silent call. The landing outside my door had been particularly unstable all day. This morning, there had been 7 doors visible on my floor. 7. One of them, darker than the others, almost black, seemed to beckon to me every time I passed it. It was usually positioned between Mr. Baird's flat and the stairwell, where no door had ever been. I took a deep breath. This wasn't a physical confrontation in the traditional sense. There was no monster to fight, no villain to unmask. This was an acceptance of the impossible. A step into the unknown. I walked to my front door, opened it, and stepped onto the landing. The black door was there. Solid. Real. It radiated a subtle coldness that contrasted sharply with the heat of the key in my hand. The usual sounds of the tenement, the distant traffic, the hum of the city, seemed to fall away, leaving only the relentless click-click, pause, click that now felt like the building's heartbeat. I approached the black door. There was no handle, no peephole, just a small, ornate keyhole, almost hidden in the dark wood. It looked ancient. My hand was shaking as I raised the strange key. It slid into the keyhole with a soft, oiled precision, as if it were made for this very lock. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. What lay beyond? Another, stranger hallway. Oblivion? The heart of this madness? Then I turned the key. The sound was not the familiar click-click, pause, click. It was a single, resonant thunk, deep and final, like the closing of a vault. The door swung inward silently, opening onto not a room, nor a hallway, but darkness. A darkness so profound it seemed to swallow the faint light from the landing. And from within that darkness, a sound, a vast, slow, rhythmic breathing, like the turning of immense, ancient gears. And something else, a low, almost subaudible hum that vibrated through the floor, through my bones, through the very air. I stepped across the threshold. The door swung shut behind me with the same soft, final thunk. I was in a space that defied geometry. It wasn't a room, but a passage. The walls, if they could be called that, seemed to be made of shifting shadows and faint, interlocking patterns that resembled the wards of countless keys. The floor was uneven, sloping away into the oppressive darkness. The air was cold, still, and carried that same faint scent of damp wool and ozone, but stronger here, purer. The rhythmic breathing sound was louder, closer. And I began to understand. The clicking, it wasn't just about locking doors. It was a form of attunement. A maintenance. The building, this ancient, impossible structure, it wasn't just stone and mortar. It was alive, or something akin to it. And the doors, the real ones and the anomalous ones, they were pores. Access points. Ways in and out of its manifold, shifting reality. It's safer this way. Mrs. Henderson's words. Safer for whom? For the inhabitants, to be aligned with the building's strange rhythms? Or safer for the building itself? The key in my hand was now cool, its purpose seemingly fulfilled. I walked forward, into the oppressive darkness, drawn by an unseen current. There was no sense of panic now, only a strange, detached curiosity. The fear had been burned out of me, replaced by a chilling awe. I don't know how long I walked. Time had no meaning in this place. Eventually, the darkness began to coalesce. I saw faint lights ahead, like distant stars. As I drew closer, I realized they were peepholes. Hundreds of them, embedded in the shifting, shadowy walls. Each one glowing with a faint, internal light. Hesitantly, I approached one and looked through. I saw my own living room. Myself, sitting in my armchair, reading, a look of profound unease on my face. It was a scene from weeks ago, before I found the key. I moved to another peephole. Mr. Baird, meticulously locking his door, his face calm, serene. Another. Mrs. Henderson, smiling faintly as she turned her key. Click click, pause, click. I was seeing them all. All the tenants. Each locked in their own little loop of ritual, of perceived safety. This place, it was the nexus. The control room. Or perhaps, the dream of the building itself, and the tenants were merely figures within that dream. The contagion wasn't a disease. It was an alignment. A slow, quiet absorption into the building's fundamental nature. The extra doors, the shifting hallways, they were glimpses of its true, multi-layered reality, a reality that usually lay hidden beneath a veneer of mundane normalcy. And the key? It wasn't just a key to a single door. It was a key to understanding. Or perhaps, a key to a different kind of lock. I saw another door, a plain one, almost invisible against the shadowy wall. It had no keyhole. I reached out, and it swung open at my touch. Beyond it was, my hallway. My familiar, if now unsettling, tenement landing. Flat 2B was directly in front of me. The light was normal. The air smelled faintly of dust and old wood. The relentless clicking was still there, but it sounded, more distant now. Less oppressive. I stepped back onto the landing. The plain door vanished behind me, leaving only solid wall. The black door I had entered was also gone. I don't know what I am now. I still live in flat 2B. I still go to work, draft my documents, maintain my routines. But everything is different. I understand. I understand that the building is not just a building. It is, a presence. Ancient, vast, and largely indifferent. The locking is a part of its life cycle, its way of maintaining its strange equilibrium. The shifting realities are merely facets of its true self. I no longer feel the intense dread. The fear has been replaced by a kind of weary acceptance, a profound and unsettling knowledge. I am no longer isolated from the anomaly, I am, in a way, part of it. Or at least, a conscious observer within it. Sometimes, I still see the extra doors. They no longer frighten me. I know they are just, other pathways within the building's myriad dimensions. The hallway still occasionally feels longer, or shorter, but I navigate it with a newfound, almost intuitive sense of its true geography. The key, the strange iron key, sits in the ceramic bowl by my door. I don't need it anymore. Not for my own lock. But sometimes, late at night, when the chorus of clicks is particularly strong, I pick it up. It feels warm in my hand. And sometimes, very rarely, I use it. Not on my own door. But on one of the others. The ones that flicker in and out of existence. Just to see. Just to understand a little more. I don't lock my door with the ritualistic click-click, pause, click. I don't need to. I am already secure. In a way that Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Baird, for all their efforts, perhaps are not. They are part of the rhythm. I am aware of the symphony. The quiet contagion continues. New tenants will come. They too, in time, will learn the rhythm. They too will be told, it's safer this way. You'll understand soon. And I will watch. And I will listen. Forever a resident of this place, bound by a key I no longer need, and a truth I can never share. The clicking goes on. It always will. It is the sound of reality, reasserting itself, one turn of the key at a time.